my fellow Westorians. I'm Aziz. With me is Ashea, and this is Valar Rereadis. Each episode of Valar Rereadis for the Winds of Winter will feature a guest or guests. We'll take a closer look at each chapter, going through them one by one instead of in batches. A standard warning must apply as well. These chapters are subject to change by the time they are finally and published at last. So that's something extra to think about. But today's guest, the first of our guests for this series on the Winds of Winter chapters for Valar Rereadis, is the one and only JoeMagician. Hello, JoeMagician. How are you doing?
Hey guys, it's been too long since I've done History of Westeros. Previously, we talked about diseases, Alice Rivers. I forget the other ones.
Boy, that disease
the most eclectic
episode
topics
kind of aged differently, didn't it?
That one I don't want to go back and listen to. It's like, oh look, George might do some really cool things with disease and Winds of Winter. I'm like, I'm good.
Yeah, we'll just wait.
We can just skip that one entirely.
We'll just talk about other stuff until that comes and deal with that at the time. Yeah, we'll just pretend. Yeah. So you're doing regular streams over there on your channel and covering a lot of great topics. Why don't you catch people up on what you've been doing lately, just in case they're not up to date?
How dare they? But yes, on Saturdays at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, except for this coming Saturday because I'll be working. But I've been doing kind of random topics, just sort of top of my head. No rereading thing, or like, I don't even think there's a theme to them. It's just like what caught my interest on Thursday, and that's what I ended up doing the stream on. Do 2 hours. Last one was about we actually did a ranking the spin-offs, which one will be the best. Unfortunately, Ashea, Nymeria's did not win.
Oh,
Duncan Egg won, of course. I know. I'm sorry. And that's on the YouTube channel JoeMagician, youtube.com/JoeMagician. And coming up, I also have a video about what Lady Stoneheart really wants in the Winds of Winter. And I think it's more than just butchering a lot of phrase, although that is a key component.
Yeah,
because
she's not going to
not want to kill a lot of phrase.
Cool, that sounds really interesting. Yeah, y'all should check that out if you haven't. I know a lot of people listening / watching today are already regular watchingers of JoeMagician Tube, so that's cool. So they are well aware, but the rest of you, get on it if you haven't. And I actually think, just as a comment on your approach there, I think that's a really good way to do it. Like, going with what is interesting to you at the moment. You know, that's where a lot of enthusiasm comes from, like sticking with what you care about most. So I actually think that's a really good way to do it.
It's good when it works. When it doesn't, I'm like, oh, I have to think of 2 hours about, oh God, about what? Oh God. Most of the time it works though.
So, well, each episode of Valar Rereadis for the Winds of Winter will also start with a history of the chapter itself. These are generally going to be just a couple of lines. There's not a lot of history for each of these chapters, but it's fun to know these little details. For example, this was the third of the sample chapters to make its way out into the public. Theon 1 was officially released, as in full form, on George's website first, and then Tyrion 1 was read at a convention, and then this one was read at a convention. And then it was read again. So it's been read out loud twice, but both times were in 2012. March at Tiff Bell Lightbox in Toronto, which is a cool center, a site that's got a lot of neat sci-fi and authorial type stuff going on there, from what I could tell by reading about it. And then at MissCon, how random, a place, who knew? In May 2012, the place to be was Missoula, Montana, because not only was the Victorian chapter read there, but the Tyrion chapter was read there as well. So that's pretty sweet. Missoula, Montana got the hookup in 2012 with those chapters. However, not the entire Victorian chapter was preserved. Only about, well, I would say about half, but I don't actually know. I don't know how much of it's missing. The rest has been summarized, and we have about 8 minutes of it that was recorded on YouTube and taken down, word for word. So that's what we're working with today. But of course, as always, this touches on a number of topics, this chapter, and that gives us a springboard to discuss a variety of things. So that's what we'll use this for. We'll bring up a lot of the different things that this chapter touches on, and use that to make predictions and explore the deeper topics that those things indicate. Let's start off with the brief synopsis. Just a couple paragraphs here. Victarion prepares a sneak attack on Meereen, planning on breaking their siege of the city. He's excited for the battle, and his men are excited to go home. He reveals that the horn will be blown during the battle at some point. The job of sounding it will fall to 3 hapless, alliteratively named thralls, each tasked with blowing it once apiece, calling on dragons, and one of A Song of Ice and Fire's more chilling recurring motifs, the triple horn blast. He rubs some of his blood into the horn, imagines how great he's going to be, and puts on his admittedly sweet armor before heading up on deck to give a hearty speech. As his men cheer, they sail towards Meereen and the action. So, JoeMagician, what is your first impression of this chapter? And just a general kind of take of overall feel of it.
You know, sometimes people say that George is bad at writing romance, love, and even sex scenes. And I think this goes the other way, because this is a beautiful chapter about the deep, deep love Victorian Greyjoy has with this weird dragon horn as he caresses it, calls it mine, for some reason thinks about how he just really, really, really wants to blow it right after he thinks about how I can't have sex with the Dusky Woman, which for some reason in his head he's linking blowing the horn with sex. And it's like, okay, Victarion, I don't know what's going on in your head, but Euron has done some very strange things to you in this time, or Moqorro. I don't really know what's going on here. It feels a lot like almost like Victarion's under a spell, or that he's ensorcelled in some way, because what he's saying and what he's doing as he's about to go into a ferocious battle against enemies he has basically no scouting on is kind of terrifying, especially when you consider the kind of brute and the pure amount of violence Victarion's capable of dishing out. Like, it really feels like this is the step before he and the Ironborn lose their minds in the Battle of Fire and just kill maybe everybody around them.
Yeah, they're like about to become a bunch of Cthulhu cultists. They're about to become the thing that they're an homage to or something.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you about it feels like there's more going on than just ambition. That's a major topic we have to discuss today, where it seems like something magical is going on. And in typical George fashion, there's multiple candidates for what could be the influence, and it might not be just one of them. It could be all of the above. Also, that's a fairly standard thing for George to do that we enjoy very much because he's good at it, and it's fun, it sets up mysteries, and it gives us a lot to talk about. This chapter also is contains a very underrated set of subplots. And what I mean by that is there's very little in this chapter and that is set up by this chapter that's been spoiled by the show. Right? Like Victarion, Moqorro, the Dusky Woman, the Dragonhorn, none of that's on the show. Not only are they not on the show, but it isn't like given to some other character. Like, that's something they did a lot, right? They would narrow things down and give one character's plot to another to not have to introduce a new character. That was a pretty common thing for them to do. A lot of times it was understandable. Sometimes it made you scratch your head. But yeah, they definitely had to shrink and narrow things down a bit. No one on the show had a firearm. Right? Dany didn't get a full-time advisor like Moqorro is somewhat set up to be, like a Melisandre of her own to match Stannis' Red Priest, right? And the show's version had Dany leading the attack on the siege, the ships around Meereen in the show. And she's not going to be in this battle at all in the books, it doesn't seem. Like, I would say 99.9% she's not going to be anywhere near this battle. So that's a great strength of this plot line, that it's very much unspoiled, but it's also kind of folding itself into the other plot line. So, meaning in A Dance with Dragons, Victarion and the Iron Fleet were in full travel mode, piracy mode. Now he's actually set to interact with other POVs, even if it's just battle. But there's reason to think there's going to be stuff after the battle. Example being, well, Dany's not there, and that's their goal. So something's got to give there. They got to be like, well, we can't capture her if she's not here. So that's one of the things I want to touch on first. Another question for JoeMagician here. What do you think of this structure? With this battle being one of the first things we see, and here's an actual quote from George. He said this Victarion chapter starts, quote, 5 minutes after the end of The Winds of Winter. He wants to resolve these 2 big battles first and then get into other business. So that's a pretty big change, isn't it? Starting off with battles. We've never really had anything like that. How do you feel about that?
I think this kind of shows a difference in the narrative as he's kind of progressed through Song of Ice and Fire, where he previously likes using big moments of blood and battle and killing as the way to do the climax of his books. And then normally there's kind of a few chapters to cool off, and then it ends with something leading up into the next one. This is a very different, almost a Feast for Crows style narrative change, where instead he's giving you the battle up front, and he wants you to think about the consequences of it afterwards. It's not, the battle isn't the thing that's the most interesting part of what's about to happen. He's going to use that to tell a lot of narrative stories, as you said, about Dany, what's going to happen with her, Barristan's aftermath, Victorians, what's going to go on with the dragons. Everything about the Battle of Fire is setting things up instead of being the point of the book, sort of. Like, you kind of see that with the battle at the Blackwater with the Red Wedding. All these big moments are what everything's leading up to. And I think that's a very different way of trying to get his audience to think about battle and just the mass violence in a very different way.
That's a great way to put it. And also, I'd say, especially using Blackwater, since you mentioned it as a comparison, when you read/watch Blackwater for the first time, it's one of the few battles, I think, in the entire series. And it's actually, this is something you could say in general about fiction, is that, let's be honest, most of the time when you see a battle on screen, you know who's going to win before it even starts. That's true, and that's true with these battles. We know, like, Victarion may not accomplish his goals, but he's basically fighting on Daenerys' side as part of his game here, and that's gonna work, at least that part, meaning that Daenerys' side is gonna win this battle. No one's doubting really that Stannis is gonna win the Battle of Ice, or that Euron is gonna win this battle that's being set up. Right, it's not, like you say, it's not the result of the battle that's the surprise. It's maybe who lives and who dies, and what else it sets up, and as you say, the aftermath, the conflict, the way the characters respond to it. That's the meat. That's the thing that we care about the most, perhaps. And in this battle, it's similar. We maybe don't have as many characters from Victarion's side of things that are in his ship or whatever, that we are concerned for their future, but they're certainly going to interact with characters that do. Let's talk a few themes and parallels real quick, and then we'll get into some of the specifics. We're going to expand on some of the things Joe just brought up and some of the things that we said at the start as well. So this chapter is, as we said, partly is only summarized. It's not the second half, and the first half is fully written out. So it seems to end with some kind of rousing speech of which we don't know the words. Interestingly, that's also a key feature of Barristan 1. We do actually get the words for that speech. Likewise, Barristan names his horn as a signal during the battle, and Victarion's plan for the dragon horn is for it to be blown at a specific time as well as a specific number of times. Nicely fitting with this theme of 3 is the presence of 3 POVs giving us this battle. We have Tyrion, Barristan, and Victarion sort of triangulating it, or pyramiding it. Barristan, these 3 guys, their chapters start roughly at the same time, pre-dawn on the day of the fighting. Since George said this chapter starts 5 minutes after the end of A Dance with Dragons, it seems like a decent one to begin with. But also, a surprise attack by the Ironborn on Slaver's Bay may also parallel a surprise Ironborn attack on Old Town. Well, actually, it wouldn't be a surprise that they're attacking. It would be a surprise that they succeed, at least to the people on the inside. Us readers wouldn't be so surprised. What I mean by that is Old Town knows Euron's trying to get in, but they may be preparing for the wrong type of attack. Perhaps similarly, we can say that Stannis has a rather huge surprise defense. Instead of a surprise attack, he's got a surprise defense, the Ice Lake, for the phrase. It might also be fair to say we have a little doubt who's going to win any of these battles, like Joe and I just discussed. Quite a lot of other things hang in the balance, like who lives and who dies, and of course, supernatural elements in this battle. This chapter in particular is where the supernatural elements are the most discussed, the most highlighted, and that is where some of the biggest mysteries lie. So that's a cool aspect of this chapter that is not present so much in Tyrion or Barristan's chapters. Also, more interesting parallels. Victarion, in this one, thinks of his first battle. And so does Tyrion. And Barristan mentions his first battle as part of his speech. And Tyrion thinks how you always remember your first. Well, Tyrion's first is the most recent of the three of them. So he's the springboard for thoughts like that, where Victarion is the guy that's like, I'm so ready. He's the one that's the most lusty for this battle. They all get their armor on during their chapters. Barristan's already armored as his chapter starts. It's one of the first things described. But the Dusky Woman helps Victarion, and Penny helps Tyrion. In the Forsaken chapter, Euron's armor is going to be noted as well. And let's just say it's vastly fancier than Barristan's gilded white enamel, or Victarion's kraken adornment, or even the breastplate with scenes of depravity that Tyrion claims from the dead Yunkish lords slain by Jorah at the end of Tyrion 2. So these three POVs also ponder the danger. Tyrion's anxious. He's the least experienced in battle, the least warrior-like of them, although he's not too bad. He's certainly survived a couple battles. But more importantly, it reminds him that he wants to live, and makes him question whether he deserves to. Barristan actively feels alive due to the prospect of death, and he notes how interesting that is. When you're on the edge of death, you feel the most alive. Victarion, though, he just can't wait. He's just ready to go. It's sort of like how we all can't wait for the Winds of Winter. It's kind of meta, right? So back...
relating to Victorian. Oh, no.
So, like we did in Valar Rereadis for the main main released series, we started off every episode with our homemade titles and the first line of the chapter. So we'll do the same thing here. Victorian 1, the horn has 3 blowers, a.k.a. the prequel to Ocean's 11, Ocean's 10. And it starts off, the noble lady was a tub of a ship, as fat and wallowing as the noble ladies of the green lands. And I think Joe just quit because of the puns. He's off to do this.
The Z's puns got to me again. It's like, it's been good talking to you guys. I'm just going to head out, that's going to be how it goes. I was also thinking about the themes as you were talking about them, and in terms of how excited Victorian is, but it's not even really clear what he's excited for. Like, in a sense, it's battle. Like, he wants to kill a lot of people, but he also really wants to blow that horn. But he also really wants to get Daenerys, and his mind is so scattered. Like we were talking about earlier, that it seems like someone's messing with his head. It seems like there's, like, as you said, like the tentacles of Ocean's 11, but it's like there's like 3 or 4 Victorians even in this chapter that seem to be totally at odds with each other and what their goal is for the Battle of Fire. It makes me question, just like as a reader, like, what is he going to be like at the end of this? Is it going to be like an internal struggle between the different his different wants and needs as he goes into it? Barristan and Tyrion are pretty straightforward. Like you said, Barristan wants to have like at least one last great battle. Tyrion is trying to survive, but we get the feeling he's probably going to find his way into somebody's inner council. It's like, what? which Victorian will win? And I think the answer to that could be pretty terrifying, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree with you. As we'll get to a bit later in the episode, I have, like almost everyone, I don't expect Victorian to survive the series, but I'm dubious that he's going to die early on in this battle or in the battle at all. I think his death maybe comes later, and well, we'll get to that. But to start off, one of the questions that's been out there in the fandom for a while, is the question of the missing ships. Now, it could just be something straightforward, like this is a dangerous voyage after all, and they did have storms afflict them. However, he broke his squadron into 3, and one of the squadrons, only 9 of the 33 to 35 ships made it, so a really small number, only about a quarter. And those are the ones that pass through Sothorio. So also, this was the most dangerous area that they happen to pass through. Do you have any thoughts on the missing ships? Do you believe in any of the theories about that? Or do you think it's just the dangers of travel or anything like that? Anything you want to say about that? I'd be curious to hear.
Well, my very skeptical side just says George has ships lose all the time. It doesn't always mean anything. But you could easily write it so they don't go missing. So then what's the point? Is it that there's a secret like Euron fleet that's trailing behind and they're waiting for Victarion to do something and they have separate orders? Or is it maybe supposed to, as a narrative purpose, supposed to make Victarion more desperate to blow the horn? Because if he had his full fleet, then like he'll win easily, right? I mean, he's fighting against guys that are on stilts and chained together. Like, this is going to be an easy victory. But if Victarion wants to achieve his total victory, whatever that even means at this point, it seems like George is very much pushing him towards the fact that he's going to rely on Moqorro and the horn more than his axe.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, just something that makes Victarion take more risks. That's a great idea, because I personally am not a big fan of the conspiracy theory. After all, Euron wants Victarion to succeed. It seems strange that he would undermine him in a mission that he himself wanted to do himself. Remember, Euron was the one that planned on going himself before the Ironborn shouted him down. It was like, nah, let's stay here, and he had to change his plan. So I don't think that was an act. After all, he had just won a great victory. I don't think you're about to. I don't. That's the worst time to convince people, or the best time to convince people to do something that they're not willing to do. And even then, they didn't want to do it. So I don't think that was some kind of trick.
And especially the idea that like, if there's some sort of double cross coming for Victarion, it's not like Euron is against kinslaying, and he would probably very much enjoy killing Victarion by his own hands, or at least watching it happen. Him sending an extra fleet to attack Victarion after he wins a battle, like, that doesn't seem like him. He really enjoys seeing the effect of his bad actions personally.
And I think that would be destructive to the fleet. Like, why not just kill the single man and cause, like, wreck all those ships? It seems really inefficient, right? And also, we were noted that among the missing ships was led by Red Ralph Stonehouse, which is one of Victarion's most loyal guys. Now, that doesn't mean, he couldn't have turned against him, but it's certainly an argument against that. So anyway, let's move on. One idea I like, though, amongst this is that he doesn't really care about the fleet, that the whole thing might be misdirection. He doesn't care about, he may not even care about Daenerys, meaning that all he cares about is that horn being blown in the presence of dragons. One way or another, that's what matters most. Blow that horn. The rest to him is just misdirection. To him, that's the only thing that really matters. You think that's a possibility, or is there something maybe missing from that idea that makes it not work?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, Victarion. I think one thing that's very strange about reading this chapter is how much his perception of Euron's quote unquote poisonous gifts has shifted. Like, earlier on in the book, he's like, everything Euron gives me, it's poisonous. It's the worst thing ever. He's suspicious of the Dusky Woman. He's suspicious of the dragon horn itself. And by this chapter, he has completely flipped on them. So he's like, the Dusky Woman's great. I love her now. I love the dragon horn. This is all going to go great. Everything's coming up Victarion. And I think that that's sort of the place we're going to, that he's really lost perspective on practical things around him. Like I said, it really does seem like something is drawing him towards blowing that horn in a way that's forcing him to ignore everything else he should be concerned about.
That's a very good way to put it. Yeah, I think that there's some odd things missing from his plan, and some people might chalk that up to him being not very bright. On the other hand,
he's a good tactician.
Yeah, he's not dumb about combat, right? He's got a lot. His culture has a lot of experience there. This trick with the hiding men on ships isn't something he came up with on his own. It's something that probably Ironborn have done before, and he's just borrowing an existing play from the playbook that has been tried and true. It's not like something he just came up with on his own, I'm guessing. He just smartly applied it to the situation, probably from a choice of about 10 options or something like that, something small. So so it doesn't mean that he's necessarily super clever, just that he's capable within his element. And he is clearly a capable sailor. Like, you can't go across the world with 100 ships. Well, he didn't. Not all of the ships made it, but still.
He did a pretty good job. It's a high percentage.
Yeah, I mean, I would have done way worse. So
I would wreck one boat, never mind 35.
I would have had a fate more like Maester Kerwin,
Yeah.
Poor Maester Kerwin.
Oh.
So, folks, if you're out there watching, have questions, feel free to submit them here. We'll pause every once in a while to take questions if they're there. Otherwise, we'll just keep on going. Let's get right into the horn then. That horn is certainly one of the biggest, most curious and interesting aspects of this chapter. It's super mysterious. We have no idea what's going to happen. We have maybe we have some idea, but picking amongst those ideas as to which is more likely is very difficult. So we'll start off with a small quote here. We'll talk about the horn as a physical thing and then on to its effects. Think how big the dragon must have been to bear 2 of these upon his head. Bigger than Vhagar or Meraxes. Bigger than Balerion the Black Dread. Real quick, I want to shout out our project. The Winds of Winter Victorian audio project is only a day or 2 probably from being released. So keep an eye out for that. If you're watching live, it's not out yet. But if you're hearing this, the edited podcast version, by the time you're hearing this, it may already be out. So check our social media, and as well check for the other chapters which we're working on as well. So you had a reaction to hearing the size of his horn. So did a lot of our commenters.
Yeah.
It was one of the most commented on, like, small details, was that a lot of people didn't realize the horn really came from a dragon and are perhaps dubious of that, and some people were just, weren't completely clear on dragon anatomy in general, which is, an interesting topic. So let me get your reaction in general to this horn.
So the first time the horn shows up in the King's Moot, I don't remember thinking too hard about it in terms of, like, it says it's a dragon horn, but I'm like, that must mean a horn for dragons. Like,
Yeah.
Like maybe it's like a big aurochs horn. Maybe it's like some big long dead animal. You never know. The Valyrians were all over the place. I didn't really put too much thought into it. And then you read this chapter and it clarifies it. No, it's not a horn for dragons. It's a horn from a dragon. And also that's bigger than Balerion. It's like, wait a second, does Victarion know how big Balerion the Black Dread's head was? I'm not really so sure on that one. But that was one thing that, like, really threw me. I was like, I think I asked you in, like, Twitter DMs, I was like, Aziz, do dragons have horns? Like, did I miss something here? Because I kind of thought of it like this big curvy thing, and I remember that the dragons have the spikes coming out the back of their head. I was like, is that horns or those skulls? But I guess they are. I ended up convincing myself that yes, they actually is a horn of a dragon, because it's it has that black iron color to it, which we know the dragon bones actually have. So it's like, okay, so I guess that's what's going on here. But thinking about, like, in the terms of, so a massive dragon died at some point and they ripped off one of its horns and then did all this other magic to it, and it left me questioning, like, I was a big doubter, to be honest, of, like, what exactly the horn did at the King's Moot. I was like, okay, like, maybe, like, it seems like Euron was just putting on a good PowerPoint presentation. Like, he had music, he was showing off all of his loot, all these other kind of things. Like, he convinced them that way. But now that I realize that it's actually literally a dragon horn, along with all the runes and stuff on it, I'm like, okay, so maybe this actually does have a magic effect that I was really discounting earlier, and I didn't expect to get that from this chapter.
Yeah, it's a really neat. It's a surprising part if you get into that. It's easy to miss, to think of it as just he's seduced by the power from a human perspective, and that is probably part of it. As we said at the beginning, it's probably not just one reason. My favorite example of something that has multiple influences that are probably all accurate is like Jaime's fever dream after having his hand cut off, when he's drank dream wine, he's got a fever, and he's put his head on a werewood stump. So so all 3 of these things seem to be in play, right? It's the same thing here. I think we have real life ambition. He's legitimately, like, feels that this thing can give him power, but there's magic going on. The horn itself is sorcerous, and it may be having like a golem type effect on him, causing him to want it. He's horny for the horn, and then there's
a good one.
and then there's Moqorro, like firearm, like that could be some sort of form of control, not unlike how Melisandre is controlling Mance through those bracelets, those ruby bracelets. There's maybe some sort of relation to that type of magic. So first of all, let's start off with where the horn came from. Another claim that's made in this is my brother got the horn from Valyria. He just uncritically repeats that claim, which has been not debated in the fandom quite a bit. Originally I was like, no way did Euron go to Valyria. Now I'm like, okay, maybe now I fall on the idea that he did go, but he didn't personally go. He went there and made his slaves do it, because it's so similar to how the Valyrians treated their slaves, sending them down into the mines to face fireworms and gas and death to get loot. And that's what this is, right? So I think that fits super well. So I think the horn came from the warlocks who were bent on revenge on Dany, and he just sort of absconded their plan. Is that where you fall on it? Do you think the horn came from the warlocks or Valyria, or do you have anything else to say about that, or disagreement or agreement or whatever?
The weird thing about Euron and Valyria is that he gets so upset when Roderick the Reader tells him he never stepped foot on Valyria.
Yeah.
And I tend to think that's George at least letting us know that Roderick has hit on something true, like you were saying. Like, sure, he went to Valyria in the same sense that he like stood outside and from the windows looking in. Well, like you said, like he let his slaves or his mutes go in. I think that's probably where'd they even find it? Like, we know that Valyria was destroyed by volcanoes. The cities are in ruins. Are we to believe that they're like somewhere close to the shore? There's just like a temple with a dragon horn sitting there. And then the mutes went in. They're like, well, this is what we need to get Euron. This is what he's looking for. Right? He told us to look for dragon horn stuff, right? It's like, I don't know about that. It seems so dangerous that anyone that goes on there is probably going to die like quite soon or turn into stone men. So I tend to believe the warlock story that he stole it from them. I was thinking back to the idea that this just came to me. I was thinking about how the horn may be having effect on Victarion. If you remember in the under the gallery at King's Landing, Tyrion and Arya both have the sensation that the dragon skulls are alive.
Ooh,
they think they're watching them. They think they can hear them scream, like yelling, and it's like a weird thing in the back of their head. And this may be reinforcing the fact that there's something that lingers in dragons because they're so magical. But anyway,
that is a good point. Yeah, I didn't think about the skulls in that light, the way they did kind of both Tyrion and Arya. You're right. This has sort of been.
If it's one, you can dismiss it. It's both. That's weird.
Good catch. That's good.
But for the warlocks, like, Karth is so old and the warlocks are so strange. I've often wondered if the Undying and the warlocks themselves are like some sort of organization that actually came from Valyria or something like that, or they had roots with Valyria, some sort of deep relationship, and they just happen. Maybe they traded for it at some point. Maybe they traded a whole bunch of their shade the evening to the Valyrians who really like going on drug trips, and they're like, here, have this horn. Because that's one thing we know about the Valyrians is that the things that exist now are rare because Valyria is gone, but they weren't rare at the time. Like, Valyrian steel swords were everywhere. They were common. They're only worth as much as a mountain because the smiths are now gone.
Yeah.
So with how old the Palace of Dust is, and kind of maybe almost a symbolic relationship between the fall, the Palace of Dust itself, and the fall of some great magical thing, which was Valyria, maybe there's some kind of connection there. I could just believe that over the many centuries and the power of the warlocks that they just acquired a dragon horn. They've been holding on to it as kind of like a cool thing to have, not really needing it.
Because there's no dragons.
Why would you?
Yeah. Like, ooh, hey, all of a sudden this has a use.
or fallen Valyrian houses, like we see with Rhaella's crown. After a certain point, Viserys and Dany have to sell it. With Valyria gone, there's a lot of big magical Valyrian houses that over time have lost everything. So they're gonna start pawning things, basically.
So let's talk about this aspect of control and Moqorro over Victarion. He's the one who flat out says, blind to the strings that make you dance, and that, of course, Victarion bristles at that. He's like, I don't, no one controls me, no one makes me dance. Of course, actually, Victarion, it seems like there's a lot of people making you dance. Euron, Moqorro himself, the horn itself, maybe the gods, because this guy is about as superstitious as it gets, and he keeps adding gods to worship to his his roster. So knowing that Victarion is a threat to Dany, and that Moqorro is most likely sees Dany as the literal savior of the world, given Benero calling her that and being responsible for dispatching Moqorro. So he thinks she's Azor Ahai, so he's not going to let anything happen to her, assuming that's all on the up and up. So with that in mind, he gave Victarion this firearm, maybe just to make sure Victarion didn't die so that he himself could get to Slaver's Bay without this fleet collapsing. But again, bringing back up the topic of control and manipulating Moqorro, what do you like? How do you find balance or understanding, or what do you make of these different connections? What do you think is the strongest influence, and how do you think Moqorro is controlling him? What do you think of that idea, and just in general, these things that are manipulating him? I'd like to hear you speak to that.
So, I mean, obviously, when we're thinking about Victarion's firearm, the number one thing we all think about is the fireworms from Rhaenyra Targaryen.
Yes.
So if he put fireworms in Victarion's arm, like, is this are we supposed to understand this as something like Alien, where at some point they're just going to erupt and destroy him, and that's kind of like Moqorro's, like, maybe that could explain why Victarion's thought processes are getting so scattered and strange. Maybe he's like becoming a fireworm. That is something that, like, George has written about before, like a transition of a character into some sort of magical or horrific thing. And as they do it, their thought processes get a little bit crazier. But on a more, like,
so he's like a host, maybe. Oh yeah.
Yeah, like a host. On a less fantasy level, though, what Moqorro's doing is he's the first person ever to basically worship Victarion. he's treating him like a god. He's treating him like the savior of the world. He's telling Victarion everything he wants to hear. He's treating him like how Victarion sees other people treat Euron. And I think that's part of the power fantasy that's going into it, is that, you know, he's an ostensibly magical character who's telling Victarion, you will save the world, you will get everything you want, I see it in the flames. And after everything that's happened with Euron, you can see how that's probably very attractive to him. And it seems to be reinforcing whatever kind of psychoses that Victarion has against his brother.
Nice. Well said. And yeah, so what do you think Moqorro's goal is, or as far as, if we look a little bit ahead, what is his... you think, as far as getting from the fleet to Daenerys? This is a part I struggle with. I really wonder how he's going to make this transition. And later in the episode, we'll talk about maybe how he might interact with Dany if he gets there, which is another interesting topic. But for now, do you have any thoughts on how that might happen? That one really baffles me, like how he gets from point A to point B. Maybe it's just something we can just leave up to George's imagination. It's not important to try to suss out, but it's definitely something that I'm just like, oh.
One weird thing about Moqorro is that he knows their ship, when they leave with Tyrion, is they will not make to Slaver's Bay. Like, he's aware for some reason the ship's going to be wrecked. So it's possible that Moqorro kind of sees himself as like somebody that's sort of surfing on the waves of fate. Like, everything's leading towards a certain place, which he has seen in the flames. Very different idea from Melisandre, who sees herself as somebody that can actively change it. But I really do think that Moqorro's basically just saying, like, oh, you picked me up? You're going to the same place? I will use you for as long as it takes for me to get there. Like, the fact that he's changed out his red robes for wearing Greyjoy sails. I think it's just Moqorro's like, I have nowhere else to go. You are my only ride. Therefore, I will say whatever you want, Big V, as long as we get there.
That is a great catch, actually, the symbolism of him wearing the Greyjoy sails. We thought when we analyzed that in Valar Rereadis, we more focused on the sigil, like the fact that he's now a Kraken or wearing Kraken garb, even though he's, not really necessarily serving Kraken goals. But that's a great catch, like thinking about the fact that it's the sail, which is the engine of the ship, really, in this case.
He's just a ride. Victarion's just a ride to Moqorro.
Yeah. Who's the real captain of the ship, right? That's great. Yeah. I like that a lot. So Moqorro's also puzzling because of what he does say and what he doesn't say. Why, if he's just going to betray Victarion or just sees him as a vehicle to get to Dany, why bother telling him to claim the horn? Why bother going through the motions with, you need to rub blood on it and all that? What's the point of that, right? Like, couldn't he just say, blow the horn and it's going to do this and that? Like, this is a step that also puzzles me. So along with that, but it could be related to this topic we've been speaking to indirectly, and we can now speak more directly to it, the idea that the horn itself isn't just giving him ambition, it's literally ensorcelled him. Like, there's actual magic affecting him. Let's have this quote real quick. For half a heartbeat, he wanted nothing so much as to sound the horn himself. Euron was a fool to give me this. It is a precious thing and powerful. Precious, yeah. With this, I'll win the Sea Stone chair and then the Iron Throne. With this, I'll win the world. This is, I mean, he's not a passive guy, but compare that to his Kingsmoot speech where he's like, you'll get more of what Balon gave you. That's it. You know, like this is the same guy that's like, I'm going to conquer the world. Yeah. Like something's changed. He's had the horn this whole time, right? He brought it with him, but he's only later in the voyage, he's starting to think about it and use it. And then once he starts thinking about and using it, it's like snowballs. It's just the momentum picks up massively. So yeah, he's also possessive of it, right? When he tells the thralls what the deal is, he doesn't want anyone else to take it, right? He's like, no, I'll leave it here with me, which is kind of strange. Like they're on a ship. Yeah. Was someone going to steal it?
I'll stay in my room with my horn. Yeah. Don't worry about it. Just don't knock. Knock first. I'm going to put a rubber band on the door.
So that's, in a way, that's even more telling because it's one thing for the ambition, because that you can write off as human, you know, just like he's seduced by the power of it all. But this weird paranoia and possessiveness doesn't necessarily, that's a different sort of instinct, I think. That to me perhaps even more suggests the magic. So yeah, that it's very telling, isn't it?
It's very, very strange, especially, I mean, we joked about it while you were reading it, but yeah, George is using the word precious here. I think he's very much trying to make you think of Gollum and the One Ring. And I think one thing that especially lines up when you're talking about the One Ring from Lord of the Rings and the Dragon Binder here is that the ring itself tempts everybody, right? Everybody wants it. Everybody thinks they're going to put it on their finger and they're going to become the new Dark Lord of Mordor and they're going to rule the world. I mean, it even tempts Galadriel and Gandalf to
people who are good. Like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But we know the ring itself doesn't really do anything. It just makes you turn invisible. That's its main power. And I wonder if George is calling on that here with Dragonbinder, because you read this quote. He said, with this, I'll win the Sea Stone chair and then the Iron Throne and then the world. How? Yeah. What does it do? What does it do, Victorian? Do you even know? Is this like, I think it's a direct parallel to the One Ring itself that, especially we were talking about this before we went live, but if you think about if the Dragonbinder itself is the One Ring, then you look at Euron's sigil and it has the big flaming eye on it. I wonder if that's something you're supposed to be thinking about, that the One Ring only serves Sauron, also Dragonbinder only serves Euron. And that may be what Moqorro is trying to warn him about. I actually thought about this while you were talking about it. And it's the idea that Moqorro may recognize that Dragonbinder, if Victarion blows it, will serve Euron, which means it will hurt Daenerys. Yeah. And if he wants to help Daenerys, therefore, it's in his best interest to make sure it's the dumb as a stump Victarion gets the dragons rather than Euron. You can deal with Victarion way easier than Euron, especially if, let's say, you put fireworms inside of him.
Or if you've already, like, established a mind meld or something, if you already, like, the firearm gives him some sort of control. That's a great point. Yeah, you really, if you're Moqorro and if you can't stop the horn from being blown, which is possible, that might be what he's considered here. He's like, well, I can't stop it from being blown, so I need to at least make sure the right person blows it to make this easier to deal with. The lesser of two
Someone
evils,
I can easily shove into the water and let him drown in his armor.
Yeah, exactly. So along those lines, it's a good segue to a quote from Tyrion 2, also Wins a Winner, which gives us some interesting symbolism that I think relates here, especially to Euron and the dragons. This comes right after Jorah stabs the Yunkish Lord, and which basically seals the deal on them switching back to Dany's side. And the description of the dead body is where we get some pretty heavy symbolism here. He lay face down on the carpet in a welter of red blood and oily black roses. Ser Jorah wrenched his sword free of the dead man's neck. Blood ran down its fullers. The white Sivas dragon ended up at Tyrion's feet. He scooped it off the carpet and wiped it on his sleeve, but some of the Yunkish blood had collected in the fine grooves of the carving, so the pale wood seemed veined with red. Okay, so that's a lot, right? Because you got red blood and black roses, and you got a white wooden dragon with blood. The red and black could be Targaryen colors, but those are also Euron's colors. And as you were just saying, with the eye and the Sauron vibes, and then black roses are kind of like black crowns, and or the fate of the Reach. The Tyrell roses are kind of doomed with the onset of winter and Euron. The white Sivas dragon, like the white dragon, could be a symbol of Victarion, who's the actual white dragon and is referred to as the white dragon repeatedly in these chapters. But a white wooden dragon with red veins sounds like Bloodraven or a werewood tree, does it not? And
yeah, kind of heavily on that one.
Yeah, and the blood seeping into the fine grain of the wood is pretty similar to Victarion rubbing his blood into the horn. So, what do you think about all that? That's crazy, huh? That's a pile of symbolism all at once.
It's one of those things where I almost wonder, is there a plan for it, or is George doing his gardening thing? Because we know Winds of Winter, these chapters, Tyrion and Victorian, they were written a long time ago, right? These were among the first to be previewed. So we know that he often does these things. Like, that's one of my favorite things about the House of the Undying, since we were talking about the Warlocks, is that it always makes sense looking backwards, but going forwards from it is very hard. I imagine all these things will make perfect sense once they happen on the page. He's just an expert at leaving himself options so that he can then pluck them into the story he wants. I mean, Viserion makes a lot of sense. I don't know how Bloodraven would be involved with this, but it's hard not to think of Weirwoods and him with that.
Yeah. It is random to think of Bloodraven here, but white wooden dragon with red veins, like, oh, sure. What else can you think of? It's just too on the nose. Okay, so let's have a real tough question, which is predictions for what's actually going to happen with the horn when the horn is blown. Considering all these things we just said about what Euron might want from it, how Euron might be the master of it, how Moqorro might be trying to mitigate harm to his savior, all that stuff. What are your general predictions or thoughts on that?
So I think it starts with the idea that Moqorro but basically George planted in our mind that Euron for some reason is the master of this horn.
Yeah.
He says essentially that it doesn't matter your brother didn't blow it. It matters that he's the master of it. You have to be some kind of blood sacrifice to it. I mean, it's Valyrian, so I'm assuming you have to kill somebody or like do something gruesome with it to make it your master. And it seems like Victarion's trying to do that with the rubbing of his blood on the horn. Maybe that's like his perception of what a blood sacrifice is. But again, Victarion's also the guy that got made fun of by monkeys, and he actually mentions him in this chapter where he's like, everyone I'm gonna get revenge on. Also, those damn monkeys.
They're gonna hate the sound of his horn. I'll show them.
It's like on Isle of Cedars, they'll hear it and they'll know. It's like, all right, man. So whatever Moqorro meant with blood sacrifice, I'm gonna guess Victarion didn't grasp it. So probably at this point, the horn still belongs to Euron, whatever that means. When we look at the King's Moot, there wasn't a lot of effects when it was blown. Essentially, the people that heard it essentially just felt like their brains were on fire.
Yeah.
Like it was like the worst sound they've ever heard. Their bodies are vibrating. They couldn't stand it. And if you want to look at a more fantasy perspective, like what did it do? It seems to have essentially like put everyone there in a trance. Because everyone just kind of goes for Euron. But then like a few weeks later, they're on the Shield Islands and everyone's like, that was a bad idea. Like, I don't know if we should have elected Euron. Roderick the Reader, who previously was silent, basically, when Euron was being elected, now is standing up to him when everyone was terrified of him after blowing the horn. So it may be some kind of like, if it forces a dragon to essentially obey you, then it has to have some kind of like mind control aspect to it. But if he blows it at the start of the battle itself, I mean, I don't think it's going to do anything to the people other than just be like, that sounds awful. Why are you doing that? Hey, cut that out, man. That's really loud. Just like knock it off. In terms of the dragons, I mean, I don't think George would layer in the idea again from Moqorro. I mean, Euron said it first, that it will bring you the dragons, but then Moqorro essentially backs that up if it's not going to have an effect on them in some way. Yeah. Although my personal favorite idea that I've heard about what it will do is it'll just make them angry and they're just going to swoop down and then just eat the guys that blew it.
Yeah.
That'd be my favorite.
I kind of like that idea, except for the problem that Moqorro is on that same ship. So if the dragons were to come towards the source of the horn, Moqorro would get baked along with whoever else. So that just doesn't necessarily work unless Moqorro just like jumps overboard again and survives in the water.
Yeah. I don't know. It's hard to say. George has really cloaked this, and that's kind of a long-running thing in the series. There are other magical horns, and it's just like, what do they do?
Yeah.
I don't know.
We had that one destroyed up at the wall before ever like finding out if it could do anything. We have this legendary Celtigar horn that can summon a kraken. But yeah. Now you reminded me of something when you brought up the King's Moot, which is that there was a Bloodraven reference there as well. A couple of weird Bloodraven references that pop up. For example, and of course we have a reason for we have an overarching reason for Bloodraven and Euron to have a connection, which is the whole failed Greenseer theory. But here's what I mean. Two references. One is Victarion describing the scream as 1,000 screams rolled into one. So 1,000 screams in one.
Wow.
And another one is the seagull. That's the very peculiar seagull that's watching the King's Moot and does not react to the horn. So there's a seagull just chilling that gets noticed a few times, and the horn is blown. Everyone's like, oh my God, that's the worst sound I've ever heard. And then like a minute later, the seagull's just chilling still. Like, shouldn't the bird be like freaked out by that horn just like everybody else? Is like, no. So that made me suspicious that, you know, Bloodraven was watching the ceremony. Like, well, this is interesting. Let's see what happens at the King's Moot here. You know, like that seems like something he might care about. But you know, that's a little indirectly related to all this, but definitely, you know, in the same umbrella of general events. So yeah, like you say. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say just one other thing with like, what does Dragonbinder do? The Targaryens don't have one of these. This is something that the Warlocks maybe had, or Valyria, and they've been riding dragons for hundreds of years at this point. So whatever it is, it can't be super critical to the process, right?
Yeah. It might be something outside of the process. It might be the kind of thing that something that was developed by the non-dragon riding families to try to like maybe get in on that action or something. Like you say, it's very well concealed by George because every scenario we consider seems to have a significant flaw with someone's ambitions. Like they wouldn't do that, or why would they want this? And something. So either we haven't touched on the right scenario, or George's imagination is just bigger than we can even conceive of. Entirely possible. Or
very possible.
Or or there's just we just can't conceive, or he's just hidden it so well that we just can't see. We might be like, when it happened, like, why did we not guess that? It might be like three people in the world
would be a huge letdown if it didn't do anything. Like if it literally did nothing and just annoyed everybody, like I think that would be a waste of the narrative space he's giving to this dragon horn. Like he's put a ton of effort into developing it, so it's going to do something.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
who knows what?
You're right, because it's also been set up. Like, where do these legends come from? If it that say that, because it's not like it's a one-time thing. There's multiple sources that repeat this line about dragon horns having this impact. Even Dany thinks about them, like them existing. She thinks about them existing. And how her family doesn't have one, or that she doesn't have one, you know, when she's out there on the Dothraki Sea with Drogon. So we know that there's other chapters that are taking place at roughly the same time, and we know that we have evidence that at least the beginning of this plan is successful. The Ironborn have landed and are attacking some of the Yunkai. But there's no hint that the horn's been blown yet. You'd think that if we had gotten to that point, you'd think Barristan or Tyrion would be like, what the hell was that? Like, what is that sound?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm really curious what it sounds like from a distance, because we've heard it close up, you know, and now we're like, it might be one of these things where it's like the comet, where we see a variety of reactions to it from multiple chapters. Not nearly as many, of course, but more than one would be interesting. So here's a little...
Has Victarion been sighted? Has he been sighted on the beach yet?
Not him specifically, but the Kraken flags have been. They know it's the Greyjoys. Like Barristan,
so he's back on the boat, trying very hard not to blow it. Like I bet he's standing 3 feet behind the 3 guys, and he's just like thinking about it. It's like, okay, they're each gonna blow it once, but what if I blow it 3 times myself? Won't that be awesome? Maybe I become king of the world. No. I have to let those 3 guys do it, but I really want to do it.
Yeah, isn't that just more evidence of it being
should be leading.
sorcerous?
That's Victarion. He should be leading with his axe the fight, but he's not, which tells you he's probably back obsessed with the the horn.
Yeah, and he's like, like you said, he's tempted to blow it. Like, what? You saw what happened to the dude who blowed it. How are you tempted to blow this thing when you saw this guy's lungs turn to sand and ash? Like, I'll do that. Yeah, that looks good. It looks fun. Like, what?
Like,
He hated the sound of it, too.
It sounds horrible. It's like, Victarion, something's going on with you, my man.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty clear that he is not gonna it's I forget the name of it, but basically, if a character tells you their plan, it's not gonna work. So Victarion's plan is he's gonna let these 3 guys blow it, and then he's gonna take the dragons. Obviously, that's not gonna happen. He's gonna do it himself. Maybe after I bet it's gonna be like the first moment that one of the guys like literally puts his lips to it, he's gonna get like insanely jealous and just kill him and do it himself.
He's like, his lips are getting all blistered.
He's like, oh, that could be me. I could be burning from the inside. I'll be so good.
So
that's his thought process. It's so bizarre.
It is, yeah. So that's why you can see, y'all, why we lean towards magic. Like, why there's something like this is not human thinking here. Like, this does not make sense. And he's not like, yeah, he's dumb, but he's not like self-destructive dumb in that way. He's not like suicidal. I mean, he wants to fight. He like loves battle. So in a sense, you could say that's suicidal, but he doesn't perceive it that way. He doesn't perceive it as like, oh, I'm going into, like, I might die here. He sees it as, oh, if I die, I'm going to the afterlife to be even more glorious, you know? So he's got all these, he's got it all sewn up here. Yeah, he's not very, it comes from not being introspective. If someone who knows themselves well would realize that they're behaving different, it's like, you know what, I'm not myself lately. But nah, the Victorian introspection isn't something they really teach on the Iron Islands.
It kind of actually reminds me a lot of, I recently did the Patron episode on Sand Kings.
Oh, cool. What a great story.
The thought process here sounds a lot like Simon Cress when the Maw's starting to control his mind.
Yeah.
Like when all of a sudden he has like really self-destructive things don't make sense, and then he reflects on them, like, wow, that really didn't make sense. Was that even my thoughts? It seems like the same kind of things happen in Victorian here, because George is showing us, I think, especially the poisonous gifts that now Victorian thinks are awesome. That sounds so much like Cress and his relationship to the Sand Kings.
Very good point. Yeah, because he also like just totally loves the Dusky Woman now. Like, I mean, he doesn't treat her.
Yeah, he hated her. He was like, ugh, she's the worst. She's a spy. She's gonna kill me or something terrible. And it's like, no, she's great.
Now she's his therapist. Like, he tells her everything. Yeah, like I know I can speak to you, Dusky Woman. You know, yeah. So that's a really good point there. This sort of like loving things that he used to hate with very little having changed, just his perception of them. Funny, interesting note here. And let's talk symbolism briefly here. With the dragon and the horn, you've got so many examples of 3 and so many examples of the horn. This same scenario of blowing the horn and getting this sort of result or summoning this thing. What I mean by that, because I don't think I said that very well just now, is that blow the horn 3 times. Each thrall sounds at once, and as you raised before, there's probably some sort of death involved, some sort of killing, blood, sacrifice involved in claiming the horn, which Victorian hasn't really done, but Euron probably has. Meanwhile, something's going to happen in result to the dragons when this horn is blown. Maybe they'll fly all the way to Euron. Maybe, like I said, they'll get annoyed. Maybe it'll be nothing. Maybe it's something we haven't suggested at all. Option D, E, F, whatever. But certainly a possibility is them coming to the horn. That's supposed to be what's happening. That's what we've been told is going to happen or could happen for a dragon horn. Meanwhile, Barristan has informed some of his men, as part of their battle plan, that when he sounds his horn 3 times, to charge towards him. And he is wielding a dragon banner and wearing a dragon winged helm and is riding Dany's silver horse. So it's kind of like it's kind of like an inversion of that. Like, blow the horn 3 times, go towards the dragon. In this case, Barristan. And in the other case, the dragon horn gets blown 3 times and the actual dragons go. So that's kind of neat. Flick commenter Meg had a great take here that said, blowing the horn 3 times is perhaps a symbol in general for Euron doing the others' work for them. Meaning wreaking destruction within the realms, destabilizing things, causing chaos, the kind of things that will break the realm, make it less, the kind of instability that allows an invading force to have a much easier time of things rather than facing a united Westeros. Euron is a major destabilizer. And of course, there's all these theories out there, which I imagine you have some some thoughts on about how Euron himself may be the guy that brings down the wall, or at least enables the breaking of the wall, which nothing would enable the others more than that. So, do you have any thoughts on any of that stuff, any of that symbolism?
Oof. Well, the most famous instance of a horn being blown and the crazy thing happening afterwards is obviously the I'm gonna probably fail on pronouncing this, but the Gjallarhorn from Norse myth. It's
Okay.
the horn of Heimdall, and it's the horn that is blowed right before the start of Ragnarok. And it seems like George so often mentions Viking and Norse religion and like characters within it that I would be surprised if that's not what he's referencing with all the different like horns that are being blown. The horn of winter, like for instance, Ragnarok is started by of years long winter coming into place, and it's also a fight to the end of the world, which kind of seems like what's going on here. Like the ice giants and then the fire giants all show up. It's like it's a big mismatch. So I'm guessing that's kind of the general theme of what's going on with these three horns blowing. That's kind of the idea there. But the idea that Euron is doing the others' work is, I think, that's something that's very deep within kind of what's going on with the other story. It's that they quite clearly cannot do whatever they want to do on their own. If they could, they would have already destroyed the wall.
Yeah.
If they could destroy humanity, if they could do all these kind of things, if you coulda, you woulda. So they're waiting for somebody to help them. And it seems that their strategy is to use conflict, that they're using the conflict of the wildlings and the Night's Watch in order to essentially break down the defenses holding them back, to essentially spring them from prison. I don't know how much Euron is tuned into that in terms of, like, there's always that weird phrase, what is it? He wants to make like an heir worthy of him, whoever him is. That strange line, like maybe that means the others, but there's also people that are super self-destructive. Like Roose Bolton is destroying the North. I don't think he's doing that to help the others. It's just like basic human greed and interpersonal conflicts that the others are exploiting that aren't really connected. But Euron, it seems,
is more direct.
If there's anyone that is doing the others' work, it would be Euron. Everything he's doing seems to be helping them so much, and it seems to be lining up in very bizarre ways. Poor Quentin obviously wrote about this in his Eldritch Apocalypse essay, which is chef's kiss, a beautiful thing. But yeah, you can't really overlook the three horn blasts and the others. And then it's like Victorian at this point he's kind of undeadish at this point.
Yeah,
like is he kind of like a fire version of the others at this point?
Is he a fire white-ish thing? Yeah. Is that what happened in that strange scene where the narrative shifted away from him to a narrator, and then he comes back? And do you think that a related question? Do you think that this isn't a question we prepared? It's something that kind of occurred to me. Do you think that Euron perceives the existence of the others, or are they some sort of just part of his? To him, he's maybe perceived them in his dreams as something that he sees as more symbolic rather than something literal. Do you think he knows there are these ice demons in the North, or what do you think he perceives there? I don't know what I think of that. I don't know how I would answer that question myself.
So if he got there's a lot of theories that Euron is essentially a failed apprentice of Bloodraven.
Yeah.
So if he did, if you look at Bran's visions, he has been shown the Heart of Winter, which is, I guess, supposed to be the others. So it could be that Euron, if he went through the same experiences, maybe came out the other way from Bran. Instead of being terrified of it, he became entranced by the power and the danger of it. But then you look at somebody like Craster, he's ostensibly working for the others. They are like this. They are buddies, but I don't think he has any real sense of who or what they really are. He's just serving a greater power that is in some way rewarding him.
Yeah, he's like sort of somewhat forced. It's sort of like Plato Aplomo, whereas he's not. Craster wasn't like, sign me up for that. He's like, well, I guess I have to. Some of the other free folk clearly don't agree with that, but Craster's situation may have been different. I don't know.
But I'm not defending him. Worship the cold gods.
Yeah, yeah. So here's another interesting quote about the horn, coming back to that, from Fire and Blood. This is something that we didn't have when we first covered this topic long ago. Now, this is a good time to plug that real quick. Ashay and I did an episode on the hellhorn back in 2013, and we some of the things that we've talked about today are touched on briefly, but mostly we focused on more detail as regards to its origin. We just get into like what it's made of, the 3 different bands, the glyphs, things like that. But we weren't able to consider a few things like this. For example, again, this Fire and Blood quote, which says, "His Grace grieved for Prince Aemon until the end of his days, but the old king never dreamed that Aemon's death in 92 AC would be like the hellhorns of Valyrian legend, bringing death and destruction down on all those who heard their sound." That's kind of a peculiar quote. It doesn't say anything about dragons, just the horn presages death and destruction on all those who heard it. It's sort of metaphorical, but sort of not. Also, keep in mind that he's speaking about Jaehaerys, but it's not a direct quote from Jaehaerys because this was written by Archmaester Gildain. So there's a little bit of, maestering going on here. But I don't know. That's a strange one. What does that mean? Why would hearing it mean you're about to die? It seems like the horn conquers a dragon or summons it or brings, if it summons a dragon, then that would make sense for bringing death and destruction. But if it's something that binds the dragon to someone else's will, well, that seems a rather indirect way to say it brings death and destruction if it's to someone stealing someone else's dragon, right? For all we know, they've stolen a dragon from a bad guy and now it's controlled by someone who's going to do less destroying. So I don't know what to make of that quote. It seems like George is maybe trying to tell us a little something, but because it's just a little oblique, a little indirect. Do you have any thoughts on this one?
So, like, one way that could be just on a non-fantasy level is that, like, if you imagine you're the orcs and you hear the Horn of Gondor, that's probably a sound that you very much hate to hear.
True.
Like, you might call it a hellhorn because every time it's blown, you are absolutely boned. Like, the men of Gondor are about to smoke your ass. So it could be something like that. Everyone else perceives the horns of battle, which seems to be a consistent theme across all cultures, or most of them, that they blow horns to start battle. So it could be something like that. But the idea that's a hellhorn, and the effect we see at the Kingsmoot from blowing one, it has to do something. Like if it summons dragons, like we know that on Dragonstone, not all the dragons were claimed, obviously.
Right.
There were wild dragons, so maybe it's a way to perhaps there were wild dragons all across Valyria, and you blow the horn in order to start an attack, and then they go back pissed about it later, and they're like, "Oh, you blew the horn and made me do your thing, you dicks. I'm gonna go back to my lair now." But for the time frame, maybe that's how you get an army of dragons if you don't have enough riders for them.
Yeah, and it makes sense that there would be a lot of legend and like false stories about what these things do. It's probably not something that there's a lot of data on, and of course, whatever data on dragon horns there was would mostly have been lost with the destruction of Valyria. Now I want to bring up a related fact here that's important. And you mentioned that the Targaryens don't have one, or that if they had one, they left it back home. They didn't bring it, which they probably didn't have one. That would be a very strange thing to leave behind. And it also makes sense. Maybe the Targaryens and the Dragonlord families were against the existence of such things. It'd be like, hey, we're the 40 families. We don't want anyone else getting into our club. Anything that allows dragon stealing is It's like they don't want a wealth tax to be implemented because they're the most impacted by it. No dragon taxes on the Dragon Lords. But the Targaryens, there's not a single example of a Targaryen that we know of dying in the process of trying to tame a dragon. Certainly Targaryens have been killed by dragons in war, like one Targaryen versus another, and certainly things like Rhaenyra being eaten by her, half-brother's dragon. But that was after being prompted, right? The dragon at first didn't even want to do it. And in terms of like an actual failure, like one guy tries to tame a dragon and it eats him, there is nothing at all like that. Not even like a wounding. We've got the wild dragon cases, plenty of deaths there, but Targaryen trying to claim a dragon and failing and getting hurt, not a single example of that. So, like, the closest we get is Joffrey Velaryon trying to ride a dragon that wasn't his, and the dragon shook him off. And, like, the dragon didn't even, like, hurt him directly. It just shook him off, right? And that just happened to lead to him plunging to his death. But he would have shooken him off over, like, 5 feet off the ground, too, probably, if he had the chance. So, that, to me, is like, yes, that's interesting. Why the horns aren't part of any of this. So, yeah, I don't know. It's perhaps just another smoke screen around all this, just for George to maybe try to keep us from figuring it out. But
it could be.
Anything to add to that?
Well, similar kind of example for Valyrian artifacts that seem to simulate something that already exists elsewhere in magic. A glass candle is basically artificial green sight. That's basically what it does. It
Yeah,
allows you to
yeah.
invade dreams. It allows you to see places you can't. That's what we see from Bloodraven. He's telling Bran everything he tells Bran you can do with a glass candle. So if that's the pattern that George is doing here, that they found a way to artificially manufacture a naturally occurring magical thing, I guess.
Okay. One other possibility is that Moqorro is angling to see the horn get destroyed. He's taking
Oh.
actions, giving advice that will lead to the destruction of the horn because he doesn't want it used against Andy's dragons. I guess that's possible. I'm not sure how that would come about. Maybe the dragon comes to his ship and torches the ship, and Moqorro is ready to jump overboard. It seems a little like action oriented, but hey, that doesn't preclude the possibility. Hey, he's lived in the sea before, and this time he'd be inside of land. So hey, I don't know, but
Maybe right before Victarion blows it, like he looks over and Moqorro's like, I gotta go do something. I gotta run an errand. I'll be right back, guys. I'll see you in a little bit. These robes, I don't know. I gotta get them looked at. You blow the horn, it'll be cool. I'll be right back.
certainly that's a moment to escape, right? Everyone's like, God, that sound. They're all just like bent over, covering their ears, and Moqorro's like, peace. I'm out.
Yeah.
So let's take a few questions here. A couple of them, a good batch is built up while we've been discussing this first part of stuff. From the TKOK Podcast Network. Great to see Magic Joe on History of Westeros. Thank you for that, Tommy. Shout out to the TKOK Podcast Network. Y'all are doing great work over there. And Tommy's a great friend of the show and one of the History of Westeros mods, so great shout out to him. And he's happy to see you on today, Joe. Isn't that cool?
Thank you. Makes me feel great.
We have Lord Commander Namian Darklin. Can't stick around for the whole stream, but looking forward to the podcast. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Lord Commander Namian. We'll keep it going. I think this is going well, and I believe the rest will as well. Dornish Dame says, Tyrion knows a lot about dragon lore. I'm curious what his reaction will be to the dragon horn being blown. That's a great question. Honestly, I haven't thought about that. Just he knows about dragons. He's the one that picks up the dragon piece that we just talked about. Mm-hmm. But like is he going to recognize that? He's going to be like, is that a dragon horn? That's a really good question. Honestly, I haven't thought about it. I've thought about later Tyrion and dragons and all that, and I'm sure you have too. Mm-hmm. But if he sees it too.
Oh,
that too. This says
he's like, oh, wait.
Wow. Because if he sees the dragons react to it, that's going to maybe, even if he suspects the sound and then sees the dragons react, that might, pique his curiosity or put him on the right track to figuring it out.
That's true. There's another character that's on their way. There's a legitimate expert in magic and Valyrian lore, and that is Archmaester Marwyn.
Yeah.
If he shows up and he sees it, what would he make of it? If there's anyone that knows about it, it probably would be Marwyn.
Yeah, that's a great question. Marwyn's role in all this is just another huge variable that throws the whole thing off, because it really matters what order these things happen in, right? Like if Marwyn comes like much later, then
much later he's going to be, yeah.
Then who knows? Like maybe he doesn't even make it because the Volantene fleet is an issue, which is part of why this whole thing is on turbo mode. Like Victarion's like, okay, whatever we do, it's got to be before the Volantis fleet gets here, because there's like 300 ships, and he's like, well, I'm brave, but I'm not stupid. Well, we would insert the word "that" in parentheses. You're not that stupid. You are stupid. You're just not that stupid.
He might be.
So
one character that's going to be really interesting to like, if he makes it to the end of it, what would Barristan make of this thing? Would he just like poke it, or just like put it in a corner and like throw a rug over it? Like, I don't know what the hell this thing is. I'm not dealing with this.
Let's let Danny
would it start
deal with that when she gets back.
You never know.
Tyrion. Wow, what's he gonna? Tyrion could like completely freak out, be like, "Oh my god, where did the Ironborn get that?" Like what the hell? He's gonna be so confused if he figures out what's going on. And also that just speaks to as well to like, how is it gonna affect people from a distance? Like we saw what happened at the Kingsmoot, but like, what about, as Victorian says, let the monkeys on the aisles like hear it. So people inside Marine will probably hear it and be like, what was that? Like Missandei, of course, she has amazing hearing, right? We've noticed that about her hearing the brick scratching and all that. She's gonna be like inside one of the pyramids on the lower level and be like, huh, what was that? That's not a good sound. I really didn't like that. So
yeah, just on like a structural level though, yeah, as you said, as we were going through like what's going to happen with the horn in the battle, we know the outcome of the battle. So the effect of the horn has to be to subvert that somehow. Has to make it worse in a way we're not predicting. So yeah, it's some sort of like a chaos that comes from it. The dragons attacking like mad beast or something like that. It's got to do something that's going to surprise us. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you don't cloak it in mystery.
That's a good point. Yeah, because at the end of Barristan 2, he is sure that the battle has been won. He's like, we've got
We're
them.
sure.
It's like the hammer and the anvil. We've got them. We've got
Yeah.
them. And he seems to be right. And with his experience, you tend to be like, yeah, I mean, if Barristan says it's over, it's probably over. Especially given we know that the Tattered Prince is free, turned on the sellsword, or turned on the Yunkish as well.
Mhm.
So like all these things that were expected to happen that were in Dany's, would be good for Dany's side, all pretty much did happen. Everything pretty much worked out. So as a point, you're right. Maybe that's a reason to think other things won't work out.
Ashaya's noting that Tyrion and Barristan have seen dragon horns with skulls. That's true. From the collection, from the Targaryen collection.
That's true. Okay, they wouldn't have even been in the basement when Barristan saw them, but yeah, that's true. Yeah. They were still in the throne room. That's a great point. Yeah, so they would know. They would be like, that is indeed a dragon horn with some stuff added to it, with some bands and all that. Good point. Yeah, good point. Max L.
Would Victorian ever have been King's Landing?
Oh, Shay asked, would Victarion ever have been to King's Landing?
No, I don't think so.
I would think not, but it's possible that he just went there.
He knows. He claims to know how big.
That's true. He does. That's true. He claims to know. Yeah, he sounds like he's seen dragon skulls before. It's possible he's had to pay homage as a Greyjoy brother, like Balon had to go there or something. I don't know. He bent the knee, but we think that happened at Pike. But maybe, I don't know. Maybe they made him travel all the way around.
That's a good question. I'm not really sure. Yeah. Euron wouldn't have gone, so it would have been Balon Victarion.
Yeah. That's, and maybe
especially since
they would have left Euron home, probably.
Maybe a way of domination over the Ironborn, because Victarion's the one that lost the battle to Stannis, so that could be like a sign of submission for Robert. Maybe that's why it would have been done.
Good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I didn't think of it that way. Yeah, a very good point. Yeah, usually the military leaders bending the knee is more important than just the other brothers. Yeah, he's the Iron Captain and all. Good point.
Maybe he has seen Balerion Skull. That's totally possible, I guess.
Max L says, if Victarion is dead, who takes up the Iron Fleet after him? Great question. It's something we have for later in the document, but we can discuss it now because we're very close to that point. It's one of the reasons I'm skeptical that he'll die right away. I do think he's doomed eventually, but if he lives through the battle, and of course, again, it makes sense that he lives given that everything is going so well. Like, who's going to kill him when the battle is basically won? Well, maybe a dragon. But still, point being, if he does die, it's not like a lot of other Ironborn characters have been cast, and they just want to go home.
No.
I figure there's a decent chance some of them just scatter and turn pirate if they're leaderless. But they might fight alongside. There's an opportunity for Dany to win them over. Maybe. The difficulty there is we've seen that they're not big fans of women leaders. But Nina made a suggestion that we considered in a different light for Daenerys in Crackclaw Point. Back when we were with Nimble Dick and Brienne and all that, we discussed how Nimble Dick brings up Visenya and how Visenya is the reason Crackclaw Point are good dragon men. So they clearly don't have a problem with female leaders. They're good dragons men that are willing to follow a queen. So that was a good reason for us to predict that the Crackclaw people will take Dany's side if they take anyone's side. Similarly here, maybe Dany's able to pull a Visenya and just look, the Ironborn respects strength after all, and if she comes in on Drogon, burning ships, destroying things, they might submit to that. Even the most patriarchal kind of dudes could submit to that kind of overwhelming power. What do you think? Do you think they would follow a woman, or do you think they need their leader to submit on their behalf for them to be united like this?
I wouldn't be surprised, especially that they've lost so many of their ships, that maybe they would just respect the power itself of Dany and her dragons. Like that makes a lot of sense. But I wouldn't overlook the fact that Moqorro has tried very, very hard to integrate himself with that culture in a very short amount of time. Like,
Hmm.
we don't see a lot from them, and I know they're skeptical of Moqorro's power, but perhaps he's able to hoodwink the remaining Ironborn in the way he has Victarion, and like emerge R'hllor, drown god kind of thing. I mean, he is literally wearing their sails at this point. So if there's going to
Yeah.
be a kind of a what's the right word for this? A popular, powerful leader, and actually all the other men are scared of him. That's the
Mm.
thing that's very important. The rest of the Ironborn are terrified of Moqorro. So if
Yeah,
there's no
they really are.
Victorian, maybe he could step in as sort of and like mimic the Iron Captain in order to deliver him to Dany or something like that. Like, look, I
Yeah.
brought you ships and men.
Yeah. So that's this is really another just a subtopic throughout all this. That's just another one that's hard to perceive because what if Victarion lives, survives the battle, and Danny's just not there, but he's still on this timeline. He's still like, well, we got to get out of here before the Volantene shows up. But if Danny's not even here and the horn doesn't have the desired effect, well, then what? They just wait?
Mhm.
Do they just chill and wait for Danny to return and pretend to be on, like, Barristan accepts them because they showed up and helped, and as far as they know, he hasn't turned on them? But then Moqorro will just tell. Moqorro's like, yeah, by the way, don't trust that guy. He's trying to steal Daenerys. Hey, I was pretending, but like honestly, I'm not with them. Yeah, I'm wearing their sails, but seriously, I'm not with them.
I just came here with them. I just showed up to the party with them. I don't know them. They're just my ride.
They were my ride, exactly. I tried to take a different ship, really. I did. The Widow on the Waterfront sent me.
They made me wear this. This
Daenerys.
wasn't even my idea. Listen,
I had
Dany,
this
I'm
cool
all about
staff that shot green fire out its
A
mouth.
really
I
cool
swear.
staff.
Which is a good segue too to talk about. Actually, I forgot we have more questions. Let's get to the questions and then we'll get back to that. From Curtis Franks, if the Warlocks did have the horn, then why did they not use it in the second book against Dany? Or did they? Well, that's a good question. Maybe they didn't have it yet, or maybe they were waiting for the dragons to be bigger. Yeah, that is a good question. I would assume they just didn't have it yet, but it is a fair question. What do you think? Do you have another idea there?
So they seem pretty certain that the whole giving a teenage girl essentially liquid acid would be enough to get her to do whatever they wanted, which is kind of true. It wasn't for Drogon. She basically walked into their arms and they were like starting to attack her and like licking her eye, and it was really creepy. It was working.
Yes.
So maybe they didn't think they needed that. But also there is a fact, if you read back the House of the Undying visions, Dany does hear strange music. She calls it piping and like otherworldly sounds as she's going through there. Maybe that's a hint that that's kind of what that was. That's a Lovecraftian reference.
Exactly.
The exact
piping,
sounds
that's what I think
themselves.
of, yeah.
But I mean, there's no reason to think that they weren't luring her there. Maybe she did. Maybe actually, this is kind of funny. What if Dragonbinder sounds different to Targaryens? What if it sounds like music to them?
Wow. Yeah. Maybe they actually like it. Wow. I never thought about that. Man,
That'd be kind of interesting. That'd be a
that is
George twist.
interesting. Wow, that's a great idea. Definitely worth marinating on that. What if they like it? Wow. Yeah. That seems.
I mean, that's the one way it could be used to surprise us, because we've already seen it makes everyone else hate it. Targaryens, dragons, maybe to them it's like a lullaby.
Yeah, maybe they just go to bed. They're like, that's so relaxing, soothing horror.
The sound of 1,000 screams.
I mean, hey, they like
sound.
lying on like hot coals. So yeah, that's so why not? Yeah.
They are literally magic, so who knows?
They find they'd find black metal to be soothing. So let's see. Next question is Matthew Dominique. What do you think happens to the dragon under the spell of the horn if the person who controls the horn dies? This might have a simple answer. Maybe not. Maybe it's just the kind of like when a regular dragon rider dies, its dragon becomes wild again or just becomes riderless. Maybe it's easier to claim the second time because if they've already had a rider, I don't think we have enough data on that. There's only a couple of dragons that have had more than 2 riders. So that's tough. That's where my mind goes when I see this question. Do you have a different take, or what do you think about that?
My mind instantly goes to Varamir Sixskins. When he loses control of his animals, they essentially try and kill him. So maybe it's something like that. I mean, that's the only example I can think of in the books where it's something sort of like a dragon bond, and when it ends, the animals go nuts. They try and kill you or they try and run away.
Ashea writes, maybe a dragon needs time to recover, like a mourning period. Because it's like, because if the bond is strong enough, especially if there's a magical component to it, it might have an impact on their psyche. That's a good idea. Yeah, because they are animals.
That happened with Silverwing and Vermithor, didn't it? After Jaehaerys and Alysanne died, they essentially pouted on Dragonstone for 50 years.
Ooh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, they did. There was that super sad line with one dragon trying to lift the other dragon's wing. That was oof.
Yeah, at Tumbleton, I think, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly. Second Tumbleton, yes, because there were two. And yeah, that's like amazing. George is like, how did you do that, George? These vicious, angry, brutal beasts, you made us feel sympathy for them. It's like, oh, it wants its friend to fly. Like, damn it, how did you do that? Max L says, I think the horn ties to the Valyrian armor. They have the same runes below the horn, and the dragon obeys the dude with the set of armor it corresponds with. That's an interesting idea. We're not sure that they have the same runes, but they do have runes, and I don't know that we have the ability to compare them because Euron sees the runes, and of course Euron doesn't see the horn, so we don't have a POV that has seen them both yet. Maybe we will. So that, I guess Euron has seen the horn. He didn't note that they have the same exact glyphs, but I'm not sure if would recognize them. But that's an interesting possibility that they would have similar or identical. If the glyphs are identical, then we might really be onto something. But if they're not,
so
interesting.
Are they glyphs in High Valyrian? In which case, Tyrion could probably read them.
Yeah, they are. Like Moqorro was able to read the ones on the one horn. So yeah, yeah. That's a good point. And or ditto like Marwyn or someone like that. Yeah. So there's a couple of people who could translate that. Good.
I mean, it's clear Moqorro doesn't want to reveal whatever he's learned, but a POV looking at it could definitely tell us what it is if they wanted to. So George has essentially denied us the information as he normally does for his twists.
Yeah. Mist Man Jones says, "What if you blew the horn and a herd of aurochs appeared?" That's funny.
Hey, that would be useful.
Yeah, that would be useful. It's like, that's food, especially if they're up at the wall. I made that same joke with when Bowen Marsh is like, or one of those Night's Watch officers is like, what happens if Borak just summons an army of pigs? And we're Undertaker's like, then eat them. Y'all have food problems. That sounds useful, man.
All right, who's been watching Miyazaki? Has George been watching Princess Mononoke, and that's what he's thinking about here? Come on. Actually, I've been thinking of for a while, we're talking about horns, the Horn of Winter. There's always been a suggestion that it essentially wakes giants from Earth.
Yeah.
And I've been wondering if since most of the other artifacts simulate some kind of magical thing, if Dragonbinder controls dragons and essentially a glass candle simulates green sight, maybe the Horn of Winter simulates necromancy. Like maybe you blow it and the dead rise under your power.
Whoa, I like that. That's a cool idea. I think of it as like an earthquake maker because so many of the giants, like their movements and sounds are George uses earthquake metaphors constantly, like rumbling and shaking. But I really like your idea too. That's really good. Okay, let's talk about the battle. I'm sorry?
Herd of aurochs, please. Yes.
Yeah.
Let's make this happen.
But another reason that joke is really good is that like they consider that must have been what the horn that Melisandre burns was. Like it must have been an aurochs horn or something. So like, the aurochs horn summons aurochs, a dragon horn summons dragons. Yeah, that's right. So okay, so the battle itself, the plan, as we said, probably a somewhat standard ironborn maneuver, subterfuge using ships that don't look dangerous. Here's this line. The slavers may shiver when they spy your sails rising from the sea, he told him. But once they see you plain, they will laugh at their fears. Traitors and fishers, that's all you are. Any man can see that. Let them get as close as they like. But keep your men hidden below decks until you're ready. Then close and board them. Free the slaves and feed the slavers to the sea, but take the ships. We will have need of every hull to carry us back home. That last line is really important because people have been predicting since like a Clash of Kings that the Iron Fleet would be the vehicle for Daenerys to get from Essos to Westeros. And really not much has changed to affect that theory. It still seems to be the best theory. And here we are with the Iron Fleet literally sitting there in Slaver's Bay. So yeah, it's probably going to happen. even though we have this Volantene fleet to consider as well, on the other hand, that's also been set up, given its, ruled all the rowers in the Volantene fleet are slaves, so they might just rise up, and that might take care of itself. Anyway, well, let's not worry too much about Volantis right now. The idea, the plan itself seems pretty straightforward. Seems like it's going to work. We see it starting to work, so yeah, good idea, especially because the Yunkai are really focused on the city and not worried about what's coming from the sea. They are expecting help from the sea, so it's part of this really works out for Victarion. The scenario is well set for a surprise attack here, but his attitude, I can't wait to fight, to get in there and kill. Like, what do you make of that? Like, this is like something I actually appreciate about Victarion's POVs, is that that is such an alien mindset to me. It's not like it's not one I respect, but it gives me curiosity. I'm like, this is such a different type of attitude, and I know it's not unrealistic. That I know that human beings like that exist. People who like to fight, people who enjoy the process of combat. And it's not like Jaime or Brienne. Like, Jaime and Brienne like fighting, but they don't really like killing. You know what I mean? Yeah. Victarion likes killing. That's a big difference. So, I don't know. What do you make of this attitude, this lust for combat?
Victarion's such a strange character because you read back this passage and his plan, he has disdain for the slavers. Meanwhile, he himself is a slaver.
Yes.
Thralls are slaves. Salt wives are slaves. But he's like, those filthy slavers, I spit on them anyway. So what are our thralls doing during this battle?
I'm going to sacrifice them to make this horn.
So I'm going to let these guys die. I may free them. Wink, wink, I won't.
And I won't bother to learn your names. Oh, yeah, I'll learn your names, yeah.
Yeah, totally, man. I will. We will be best friends forever. You can trust me, Victarion Greyjoy. Nobody can trust Victarion. But the idea that he's so excited to get into this battle, again, you have to wonder, like, when you're talking about that line about the hellhorn and how it rains down destruction and death, how was Victarion always like this? Like, he definitely enjoyed killing before, but there's a real, like, almost otherworldly bloodlust about him at this point, that he really thinks that he's going to blow this horn and make an ocean of blood afterwards. And it's like, okay, again, is this the One Ring essentially messing with his head, or is it himself? And then, but we talked about this earlier. As far as I can remember, he's not sighted at the battle lines when the Greyjoy fleet lands. So if he's so serious about this, if he's like, I have to get into battle, I'm going to be the one to kill everybody, I'm going to drive my axe into everybody's skull, why hasn't he, as far as the Winds of Winter chapters so far? There has to be something powerful holding him back. Yeah,
he says he tells them when the time comes, he's going to blow the horn, and then, it's step 3 prophet. But I don't, like you said, he's vague about what the timing is. Like, what is in his mind, what's that moment going to be? Like, what's the signal for him to blow the horn? He's like, okay, now. Like, what is that? What is he waiting for? Yeah, exactly. I don't know. So we get one more mystery amidst all this. Like, I don't know. What's it up to
Moqorro?
Maybe. Yeah, and the dragons are already out there. There's already ships on fire before the horn is blown, which I can't tell if that's Rhaegal just torching a ship or two, or if that's Victarion torching the ships. It's really hard to guess.
On a dragon. No.
I think it's the dragon, because Victarion in this chapter flat out says we need every hull to take us home. So I don't think they're burning ships, right? I think they're trying to capture ships. Now, maybe they had to burn a few just because some of them weren't capturable, but it's definitely contrary to what his orders, like, that capture as many as possible. So I wonder how those ships caught fire. That's interesting. So also another piece of symbolism here. Are you much a fan of the Trojan War? Because there's so many Trojan War vibes in the Song of Ice and Fire, and it's a huge topic that I've got a huge pile of notes on that one day we'll do an episode on. But just keeping it to things that are relevant here, like the trick itself is like a Trojan horse kind of thing, right? Like, it's even wooden, instead of wooden horses, a wooden ship. Dany's the most beautiful woman in the world. They're sailing east from one continent to another to steal. It's very much Helen of Troy vibes. Even Marjorie even says at the beginning of one of the Feast for Crows chapters, 1,000 ships, in response to, which is that's the line that Helen's face launched 1,000 ships. So there's also plague in the Trojan War. There's a long ass siege, just like Meereen. People, bunch of suitors for Helen, Victarion, Euron, the same kind of stuff. Also, the gods are a big part of the Trojan War. The gods intervening in a variety of ways and then being chaotic and unpredictable, which is pretty present here. We don't know. The dragons are sort of like the gods. We don't know how they're going to behave, what they're going to do, whether the horn sounds good to them or not. And they're also potentially, you never know who they're going to support, which is also sort of the case in the Trojan War. One of the things that the gods would do in the Trojan War is choose certain champions or heroes and give them better gear. Like, Achilles was armed by the gods. I think there's a couple others that were armed by the gods. I'm spacing out on some specific examples, but
Athena had a big part in this.
What's that?
Athena had a big part.
Oh
in
yeah,
helping out
Athena.
certain
Yeah,
people.
you're totally right. And so Victarion's arm, through the power of R'hllor, feels kind of similar to me, like being armed by the gods. Literally his arm.
Yeah. Wait, I'm thinking about this now. So if this is a Trojan War parallel, does that make? I mean, you say spoiler in a couple seconds ago to say Dany's like Achilles, but is Victorian Achilles and is like Barristan Hector?
Yeah, there is definitely some. That's a great point. Yes, Barristan definitely has Hector vibes because he's noble and taking this all on himself. He takes on all this responsibility, and he's a peerless warrior, except for perhaps when he faces Achilles. But yeah, and Achilles sits out the war for different reasons than Dany does. But Dany's not here. She's not participating. She's by far their greatest weapon. Well, when she's mounted on Drogon, and she's just not present. Not because she doesn't want to be. That's a big difference. Achilles is pouting, but still. Also, you have other like slow level themes that are really similar. Like the Trojan War was very much a lot of one-on-one duels. Like the soldiers would stand back and champions would fight. And here you have pit fighters, like, marching as part of the army, and they're, like, all really about individual glory, which is really on theme with the Trojan War. Then you have Troy getting absolutely sacked at the end of the Trojan War after this long siege, which everyone wants to sack Meereen. Even the Yunkai want to sack Meereen. Like, like the people defending it want to sack it, right? Like, the Volantines want to sack it. Everyone wants. So Meereen is really quite doomed. And then finally, there's a character in the Iliad called Telephus who had a wound that would not heal until intervention by the gods. So it's like, okay, well, that's right on point too. So, any more thoughts on all those parallels, or is that just kind of just fun to kind of run through? You added some. That was a really good take on the that Achilles thing.
I wonder how. Well, George never usually just put things in directly just for one-to-ones. He references tons of stuff, but he always wants to put his own take on it.
Yeah.
He wants to subvert it in some way.
Yeah, like how you said Victarion, like Achilles is sort of Victarion and sort of Dany, and then Barristan is sort of Hector, but not fully. Yeah, like it's not one-to-one, yeah.
And Jaime's kind of like Tyr, but then not exactly. And then Robert's kind of like Thor, but then not really. Like Bloodraven is kind of Odin.
Achilles has some Loras too, like especially the rage of Loras, like after the whole armor, wearing someone else's armor, and then getting angry because your lover's been killed and killing your own friends. Like that's what Achilles did when Patroclus died. So yeah,
that's true. Maybe it's a reference to a very specific telling of the Trojan War. Of course, I mean Troy, written by I think it's David Benioff, right?
Wouldn't that be amazing if George R. R. Martin used David Benioff's Troy for?
Yeah,
that's his model. That would be meta as hell, man.
The premiere version of the Trojan War, obviously, by famed writer David Benioff.
Yeah, when George pictures Achilles, he thinks of Brad Pitt. That's totally his.
The very straight Brad Pitt too. Yes.
Yeah, the straightest Brad. They were so blatant. Like the first thing you see in that movie is Achilles in bed with 5 women. It's like no.
Do you guys not remember the story of Troy?
It's like the first thing you see. Like, come on, man.
Sean Bean, though.
I don't even dislike that. I don't even hate that movie. I thought it was fine. Like, it wasn't a good telling of the Trojan War, but it's like, oh, come on. You have to send that message right away. Like, Anyway, we're kind of
One of
off
the-
topic now.
Yeah, but one of the few movies where Sean Bean survives as Odysseus.
You know what's also funny about that? There's that show, Troy, Fall of a City, that was done that
Yeah.
got totally review bombed because of racism. I mean, there was other reasons to not like it, but it was bombed by racism before it dropped on TV. People were mad about Black Achilles. So so there's definitely a lot of racism in those reviews because people hadn't even seen it yet. But the point, that's not why I brought this up. What I brought it up was that the actor who played Odysseus was Joseph Male, meaning Benjen. So we have two Stark brothers.
Oh my God. It's all coming back.
There are two Odysseus's. The two Odysseus's were Ned and Benjen.
And they're brothers.
Yeah.
God.
That's so cool. Okay. So here, so you said that there's just things missing from the plan here. Like Victorian just hasn't considered some of these things. Like, how none of his plan involves how to get inside this walled city. Like, how are you getting in? Like the Trojan horse got you inside the walls of Troy, but this fleet is the Trojan Iron Fleet only gets you, in Slaver's Bay. It doesn't get you inside the city. So like, none of his plan involves telling us how he's actually going to take Dany, and that's just kind of weird, isn't it?
I mean, it's kind of Victorian-esque, but I think we've referenced this many, many times. Going back to it, it really seems like Victorian is stupid. He's dumb as a stump, as George likes to tell him. But he usually has like at least some idea. And he was also responsible for the sack of Lannisport. Now that's Euron's plan, but he still carried it out. He was able to do it. So it's not like he doesn't know how to attack and take things. That's kind of his whole thing. Yeah. So the fact that he hasn't even thought about it past I'm going to kill people and blow this horn is very, very odd. It's like a bloodthirster thing. It's like he's become like a berserker almost.
It's like it's gonna all work out.
A Viking berserker kind of character. Which of course that's kind of what the Ironborn are. They're kind of like Vikings.
Yeah, it's true. They're Cthulhu Vikings, right? It's like if we're brave enough, it's gonna work out. The drowned god and R'hllor and all these other things will help them.
I wonder if his plan goes as far as I'm going to win the battle, therefore everyone will just give me the city because I am Victorian the best. Or he's going to take his super fire hand and just punch through the wall. Just like one stern punch, he's going to get it.
That's definitely something I feel like we're going to get. I mean, not necessarily a big stern punch, although that's certainly possible. But I mean, like, we should get to see him use this arm, right? Like, I would feel a little cheated if all he does is choke one slaver to death with one hand, which already showed us that, whoa, that arm is powerful. Lifting someone off their feet and choking them to death with one hand is, even really big, strong guys can't do that. Like, well, maybe the real life mountain could do that, but
or maybe he'll like burn them inside out. Like, is it hot? Like, will it actually burn you if you put your hand on them? Yeah.
And you know what else too? Like, they're still bleeding his hand, but it wasn't for his wound, or is it? Because like, why is he, I think it's just to rub blood on the horn, but it's sort of framed as like they were bleeding him before because of his wound was, needed draining, but it's been treated now with the fire. So is that still, I don't know.
Why is he still doing it?
Yeah.
It seems like he wanted to do it, that he thinks it's like a way of like blood sacrifice to the horn, or he thinks it's like he's taking care of it. Like, a very big thing among like swordsmen within A Song of Ice and Fire is they love taking care of their blades. Like they constantly wet them. They do all these kind of things to take care of it. Maybe he thinks of the Dragon Binder as like his little baby and he's taking care of it.
You got to give it blood every once in a while. Yeah. Or gets cranky without its blood.
You're having a bad night. All right, let me get you some blood. It'll be fine. Actually, with how much George talks about lactation and breast milk, I wouldn't be shocked if that's what he's going for.
So here's another question. There's a topic that this is potentially a very large topic, so maybe we don't want to get too deep into it. But just thinking ahead a little bit, Moqorro's influence on Dany. That's something we touched on very briefly at the beginning, as something that the show didn't give us. There's no Moqorro. There's no parallel Moqorro on the show. There's nothing like him at all, other than maybe like a minute or two of whatever
her name was.
Yeah, I can't remember her name. That cool actress that had like
that they had on one episode and then gone.
Yeah, she was cool, like with Varys and Tyrion. Kinvara, what was it?
Kinvara.
Oh, Kinvara. Yeah, we even saw Kinvara Street in Ireland.
Yeah, she just disappeared from the show. So like,
yeah. So what do you have any ideas, predictions for how Moqorro might influence Dany and like Moqorro's of course, I think we're meant to think of Melisandre and Stannis because so much else makes Stannis and Dany are parallels. Why not this as well? Of course, one big difference is that Moqorro is with the presumably correct savior, and Melisandre is not. And also, Moqorro has a much better track record of accuracy with his flame reading. So, with those factors in mind, do you have any ideas on what Moqorro could do, assuming he does get with Dany?
There's an interesting car crash basically that's coming with Daenerys that George is essentially sending every advisor in the world at her at the same time. You have Tyrion on her way. You have Jorah on the way. You have Brown Ben Plum. You have the Tattered Prince trying to get on her good side. You have Archmaester Marwyn. Now you have Moqorro, and you have Victarion. It's going to be a very crowded court once Dany arrives. So it's going to be like each one's going to go in a circle. It's going to be like the trick of the shadow on the wall, where it's going to be like, all right, make your pitch for why I should listen to you. Moqorro is going to make a very good pitch that he can offer Volantis. Now that's something none of the rest of them have. If they can save the Volantene fleet and release all the slaves, that is a very big deal to Daenerys going forwards. Tyrion can offer his mind and dragon knowledge. Marwyn can offer general knowledge about Westeros and kind of Valyrian artifacts, but Moqorro's got a lot of things going, and especially if Dany comes back from Vace Dothrak. I mean, we assume she's going there, right? That's going to be
no argument there. Yeah,
Vace Dothrak she might come back really believing her hype a lot more than she did before.
Yes,
like her visions on the Dothraki Sea are very much leaning into you are actually the savior. You're going to save the world. She's
getting proof of it. Yeah, there's like straightforward evidence. Yeah.
Moqorro is the character that's going to play into that aspect of her more than any of the others.
Kind of like always did with Victarion, telling him what he wants to hear, except that it might actually be true with Dany.
Marwyn has some of that, but he's not a true believer. Like he specifically says, I don't trust those prophecies. Moqorro does.
Yes.
So he has a lot to offer if he survives this, and especially if he can hand over Dragonbinder. Like, not only did I bring you this fleet, not only do I have the slaves of Atlantis and the Red Temple, look, Dragonbinder, that hellhorn you were talking about.
Right. That is a lot to deliver, a lot of proof of concept, proof of power there. Be like, look, I've got all this. Yeah, that is a lot. Because I think it's also, you raise a different point that's kind of on the down low that's important. That is, Dany needs the Iron Fleet to get across the water, but it's probably not enough, given how a good chunk of the fleet was lost. And especially she brings like all the Dothraki, like, come on, that's going to take more than 60 some ships. Like, we need a lot more ships than that. So that the Volantene fleet Yep, it's crewed by slaves. So that's set up quite nicely to fit in. So Dany's fleet could be just truly monstrous. And you're right, someone with an advisor like Moqorro who can predict the future and repeatedly, and Dany will be like, okay, well, he predicted the future again. I guess I'll listen to him, because that's kind of what Victarion was like. He predicted the future several times, and Victarion's like, yeah, he's clearly knows what's up.
Like Stannis.
How are you gonna ignore
Stannis
that?
And Mel, same kind of relationship. Where he's like, I can't deny her powers. I guess I have to use them.
Yeah, like Stannis. Yeah, exactly. Stannis doesn't like it, but he's like, I need this. Like, I'm not gonna get the throne without this. I'm behind the 8 ball. That my enemies are way too powerful. So it's a similar sort of like, is this gonna corrupt Dany a bit? Is this probably not a positive influence? It might help her accomplish the goal of saving Westeros, saving Westeros from the Long Night, or saving the world from the Long Night. But like on a personal level, she's already, we've seen this in her scenes at the pyramid where she's sitting on the top of the pyramid, which is very symbolic of her being like a god already. And she's even thinking that. She's like, am I a god now? And she doesn't like it. She's like, she feels lonely. But
she might now.
Yeah, she'll feel even more lonely if, with these stuff. And Moqorro's just going to be like, look, you're the savior of the world. I know you want to, have human emotions, but we've got some rather important duties to attend to. So I'm very looking forward to that.
I said car crash on purpose because all these advisors, I think, are going to have very negative impacts on her. like Marwyn's coming with the idea that everyone's out to kill Dany and Westeros. They hate magic, they hate dragons, they hate you. That's a bad attitude to be imparting. Tyrion's self-destructive and going to tell her to essentially burn down everyone that he hates, because that's basically what he's been up to.
Yeah.
Jorah, who knows what's going on in his set. The Tattered Prince wants her to destroy Pentos. Moqorro, I don't even know what Moqorro's up to, but feeding into her ego and to the idea that she is godlike and above other people cannot be good for her where she's going. And I think that's on purpose from George. And that's actually something the show kind of left out. They made all of her advisors good, basically. They made them relatively good people, even guys like
instead of being a bad influence, like personality-wise, they just made mistakes. That's what it was. Like Tyrion made mistakes. He was still a good guy, but he just screwed up. So yeah.
What's his name? Who's the guy with the mustache? God, I can't believe I forget his name.
The mustache?
What's
no, I'm forgetting.
This Stormcrows. What's it?
Oh,
her mother's
Dario.
name? What's her? Dario. Dario's a very bad person, but he's a good person in the show, more or less.
Yeah,
like he's brutal, but he's got a pretty good moral compass as depicted. None of these guys that are coming at Dany seem to have a good moral compass.
No, I agree. Except for maybe Barristan. But Barristan is maybe not going to be around. He may die.
Yeah, about Barristan.
Well, no, he does have some, certainly his moral compass is off in some ways, but in other ways it's about as good as it gets. Depends. Depends on how you view him. Like, yeah, certainly when it comes to Aerys, his moral compass was off, but when it comes to like children, he's like he's right about like we appreciate Barristan's take on children because it's very similar to Ned and Dany, who was like, no, we don't kill children, period. So yeah, good on Barristan for that one at least.
All the rest of these guys not going to be great.
You're right. That's totally true. And this is super. Again, I point to the complete lack of this on the show. Not like you said, what few advisors she had were good guys. Varys is like not a child torturer / murderer on the show. So
no, he's a lot better.
Is vastly different, and there's no Aegon plot, so it's all just so different. And Eerie and Jigri were killed off. Like she didn't even have them, and Recaro and like all of those characters were killed off on the show. So you're right. Her court is just, it's nothing like the show. You can't even compare it. It's just like 10 times larger and more diverse. And we're not even sure if all of them are going to make it. Like you said, like will Marwyn and Moqorro even get there? That's not even 100% certain.
Yeah.
A couple more themes for us to discuss, and this is basically our last section. We've got one thing that I find very interesting about Victorion's chapters is, despite him being dumb as a stump, which is George's words that I wouldn't dispute, he does have a poetry to him. He does have this sort of Norse like battle rap kind of thing going on, where he's poetic, and it's interesting. Like, this brutal guy he's occasionally says interesting things that are worthy of prose. And one recurring pattern was his views on the sea and the sky. Makes a ton of sense that a sailor would be keyed into what's going on with the sky and the sea, but it means even more because with Victarion's brother, who calls himself the Storm, there's that going on as well, and he's trying to make himself a god, and the ironborn beliefs center around the duality of the storm god and the drowned god. So in this chapter we have a line that's, the sea was smooth and still, the sky bright with stars, which is interesting because it's similar to this line that we see about 4 or 5 times, all at the end of A Dance with Dragons, where it says, for example, come sunset, the sea turned as black as ink, and the swollen sun tinted the sky a deep and bloody red. Okay, so there's the Targaryen colors, or Euron's colors. Here we have, the sea was green and the sky was gray. The morning grief and warrior wench and Victarion's own iron victory captured the slaver galley from Yunkai. Then the sea was black and the moon was silver as the iron fleet swept down on the prey. Then the sea was blue and green and the sun blazing down from an empty blue sky when the iron fleet took its second prize. So what I noticed about this one is it's a shift in description instead of color. There's no color in this line. The sea was smooth and still, the sky bright with stars. Instead, it's about movement and light, which are more relevant to pre-battle than the color of the sky, which is more just, you can trying to tell if there's a storm coming or just you're appreciating the natural beauty. Do you have any thoughts on that, or is that just kind of, it's the thing, it speaks for itself?
Well, George is obviously a very good writer, and he's very good at describing things. Like I think some of my favorite descriptions of these kind of things is there's one about the God's Eye, how it was like hammered like blue steel against like the sun in the sky or something like that. He's very good at these kind of things. But if you're looking at, you were talking about the colors between them, the idea that the sea has no color to it, it's just filled with stars, it's smooth and still, perhaps is a way of George signaling to the reader that like, I don't know who's going to win, or maybe no one does. Like the idea that the only winner in this thing will be the sea itself. And there's also the idea that there's been there's been this sea of blood that a lot of people think it might be Euron, it might be a Victorian that's coming. Like, is this the last time that the sea will be smooth before the Ragnarok starts and wins a winner and everything goes crazy? The last still moment.
Wow, that's a good point. Yeah, I like that. That's a really good call. This is something that when I first started reading A Song of Ice and Fire, I didn't pay any attention to this kind of stuff at all. I was just more of a nerd reader. I didn't pay attention to things like themes.
You? No.
Yeah, right? No way, right? But this is 20 years ago. And so this is the kind of stuff that, man, I wish I paid more attention to that stuff back then. It tells you so much about authorial intent. And yeah, if you're keyed into these subtleties, they can really say a lot. So another example, his sense of poetry. Now, Victarion is not the creator of those statements. Those are George's descriptions about, it's kind of more of the narrator. But he does have these poetic thoughts. Like, for example, look at this alliteration. The slavers may shiver when they spy your sails rising from the sea. That's cool. That's a good line.
Yeah.
And what about this one? They would be the first to strike a blow, the first to see that look of fear in the foeman's eyes. That's more semi-alliteration with those Fs. And then this again reminds me of the Iliad. Again, reminds me of the Trojan War, because they really go over the top in the Iliad with their descriptions of brutality as glorious, right? Like there's this line where it's like, there's nothing like a broken boy bloodied and dying, with a spear. And I mean, it's like, this is good. Like, what? Are you being sarcastic, Homer?
Yeah.
But I don't think he is. So it's really an old tradition to be like, to glorify this really brutal things, and George is maybe tapping into that, I guess.
One thing about Victorian is that he's very tuned into ironborn culture and the and their traditions. Like that's one of the things that Euron uses against him. Like when he takes Victarion's favorite salt wife and then knows that Victarion can't kill him because of the ban on kinslaying. He takes that very seriously. So I wonder if these phrases are like traditional ironborn before battle things that he's repeating, and that's why they're poetic, but he's memorized them because he takes, I mean, for ironborn culture is horrific, but he takes it seriously. He
very seriously.
He makes it a sacred thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if these are versions of long repeated phrases that captains say. I mean, this is something Balon used to say, or his father would say before they went reaving.
Oh. And he was a smart man. I mean, different sort of like for an ironborn, he was progressive. That's maybe not saying a lot, but you got to start somewhere.
You're right. This doesn't sound like Victorian. It sounds like he's repeating something.
That's a good point. Yeah, because like he's not an imaginative guy. He asks. One thing I like to cite about Victorian is he asks really interesting questions. He has no idea how to answer them, but the way he like ponders the mysteries of the gods, I'm like, that's actually a pretty good question. But because he's like, what would the gods do? What would Euron do here? And I'm like, what would Euron do here? And his like meanderings don't go anywhere, but it provides us with excellent discussion fodder.
He also asks really sharp questions of Euron that Euron then dodges. It's like, that was kind of insightful that you saw that, Victorian. How did you do that?
It's like, occasionally you surprise me there, but you're also easy to get off topic. So I'm going to distract you with, look at this shiny thing. Or
I'm going to wear a robe slightly open, and then that's going to make you uncomfortable.
That's exactly what popped into my head. It's like, cover yourself.
That's what popped into your head? Oh, God, Aziz.
Yeah.
Stop thinking about Euron's dick.
I'm thinking about Euron's horn. His human horn, to make a Futurama reference.
his big tentacle. Oh god, I hope you guys are enjoying this.
Current viewers 0. Uh-oh. No, just kidding.
Oh boy.
Just kidding. Okay, so our final topic for today is one of the most important, I'd say. I've just noted it here in the document as sacrifice/slavery, which is to say there's magic, there's mystery, there's dragons, there's battle, there's blood, but as always, we must center it all on the human element. That's pretty much the most important thing here, as always. Oftentimes, one of the best ways for us to do that is for us to try to take on the perspective of whichever on-screen characters there are that have the least agency. And that's particularly useful in a character like Victarion, who is among the least relatable, right? If you take all the POVs and like, who are you most like? He's at the bottom of the list for almost everyone, right? Like, you're like, maybe I've got a little of this character, Victarion though? No, not really, you know? So I think most of us have more in common with, say, the bastard's bastard than we do the Iron Captain. And that brings us to a line like this, because the Iron Captain has no respect for the bastard's bastard, doesn't even call him by his name. He thinks, if it made the three feel braver to believe they had a choice, let them cling to that. Victarion cared little what they believed. They were only thralls. To respond to that quote, we have a brilliant take from one of our commenters on, I think this came from Flick. Yes, from Flick. Sophia says, that's the hell of any compulsory situation. Most of us, quote, choose the path of survival and knuckle under. Or we knuckle under for security or to save a loved one. Ned chose to sacrifice his honor to save Sansa, for instance. But he really didn't have another choice, did he? When a choice is a sucky choice like that, the making of it becomes part of the abuse. It makes you party to your own diminishment. It's all the more insidious that way. Great take, Sophia. Very true, very accurate. It covers a lot of bases throughout A Song of Ice and Fire. As you used Ned as an example, and it's a perfect example because, yes, Ned chose, but he really didn't have a choice, did he? Would you agree with that, JoeMagician?
Oh yeah, definitely. And in terms of how this quote is used, I think you can very easily apply this to Victorian and Euron. That this is probably how Euron thinks about Victorian. It's like,
yes,
let Victorian think he has a choice about blowing that horn. Maybe he thinks he has a choice about giving me Daenerys or not, but I know that he doesn't. He is just a puppet that I am playing with my strings. And I think you see that in this chapter in particular, that Victorian feels that he has made a choice to blow the horn, to take the Dusky Woman in his own, to claim Daenerys, but he doesn't really. He's still, there's something controlling him. There's something pushing him. And it's just kind of undermining the idea that any of this is Victorian's idea. And I think that makes the downfall of the Iron Captain will probably have a little bit of empathy to it, in the fact that maybe Victorian will realize in the end that all these things he's been going for were really never his choice, that he was just dancing at the on the strings of Euron Greyjoy.
Well said. Yeah, I agree. It's super true. Like, he's making pawns of these thralls, but Euron is making a pawn of him. So it's really nicely said. And that's like this line, Victorian did not oft forgive a thrall for talking out of turn, but the boy was young, no more than 20, and soon to die besides. Like, he's talking about himself too, right? Like, he too is soon to die besides, I would think. And it also kind of indicates that he doesn't actually think those thralls are going to survive. He's like, yeah, if you survive, I'll do this for you. But in his mind, he doesn't actually seem to believe there's much a chance of them living.
The same as Euron giving him the Dusky Woman and Dragon Binder.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, I'll give you these things because it doesn't matter. I know at the end of this, I'm going to have all the stuff I want, and you're dead, Victorian.
Yes. And so Song of Ice and Fire is constantly reminding us that it's a story about power. Sometimes that power is filtered through the fantasy elements. It's a way for George to expand on the topic and to show us new ways that power can be abused or how it affects human beings, things that aren't directly related to our real world, but we can use to understand the real world. Another example being Penny and Tyrion's thoughts on slavery being, quote, a choice to some degree, how you could choose death. And, well, is that really a choice? I mean, for some people it would be, maybe, but not everyone can have that kind of hardcore mindset. And also Dany, who just has this loathing for the institution, partly because, well, it's a loathsome institution, but also she has a personal stake in it because she was basically enslaved herself for a time there, sold to Drogo and all that. It worked out better than it does for most slaves, but the bar is pretty damn low there. So it's a really overarching theme. You could almost say it's one of the biggest themes of all of Song of Ice and Fire is power dynamics. And you brought up the Dusky Woman. Yeah, what's the point of her in the first place? What do you think about the Dusky Woman in regard here? She just a good example of this? Someone that's forced to go along. She's just doing the best she can to survive. She doesn't really have true agency here other than jumping overboard and dying. Like, that would be about all her choices are. And she hissed at Moqorro. What do you think about just tell me what you think about the Dusky Woman in general.
So the Dusky Woman is obviously Tywin Lannister. I mean, quite clearly. She is Tywin Lannister in glamour. That is quite clear.
Obviously, yeah. I wanted a new theory. Like, everybody knows that. Come on.
Well, in terms of what she knows or what she's after, I think she's a salt wife, basically. So she has no choice in what she's doing. Like you said, if she wants to disobey Victorian, it will be her death. So she has to keep going on with it. It's the nature of, unfortunately, slavery. But I like the idea of, like, the question here that why did Euron give him her in the first place? And that's because the primary conflict between Euron and Victorian is his favorite salt wife that Euron seduced, and then Victorian felt like he had to kill based on ironborn.
Perfect. Right. Sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to throw that out there. Like, he felt like he had to do that. He felt like he had no choice. Now, we would say, are you kidding? Why did you have to do that? But still, he did feel that way.
But in a sense, by giving Victorian a salt wife back, it's a way of Euron continuing to mess with him and a way of continuing to exert power, because it's not the point of the salt wife, especially for Victorian, is you're supposed to take them. It's supposed to be the iron price. But this is a gift, and gifts are something cowards get. And it's another way of Euron is messing with Victorian at a very basic level. And he knows that it very much bothered Victorian personally that he had to kill the salt wife, as according to their culture. So he knows if he gives her one back, at some point Victorian's going to latch onto her in the same way he did the first salt wife. It's another just like brilliant mindfuck from Euron on how to get Victorian to do what he wants, basically.
Psychological hook,
it's a psychological hook on him, to the point that we see by this chapter, he's not only feels like the horn itself is kind of like his lover, but he has really taken in the Dusky Woman as a part of his inner circle. He's telling, like you said, she's like his therapist. She's telling her everything. She's really become an important part of his life.
And from a cultural perspective, she diminishes him because, like you said, Victorian takes the iron price thing very seriously. Like, he even felt shamed at buying food in Volantis, like, of all things. Like,
you should have stolen it.
I paid money for food. Oh God, shameful. Like, wait, what? So so by accepting this gift and not earning it, you're right. He's shamed himself. Like, we would not see it that way, but within his own worldview, it's consistent.
And so does the rest of the men serving Victorian. They understand that taking a gift from Euron is a way of shaming him.
Yes.
And it's a way of undermining his standing within the Iron Fleet.
That's a great take. Yeah, I think that's it. I feel confident with these takes that this is George's purpose with this character. But if there's a supernatural angle, like, I don't believe she's somewhat like a faceless person or whatever. That doesn't really work for me. But I do wonder, because she hissed at Moqorro, and if that's supposed to be like a warning, like, yeah, Moqorro maybe isn't such good news, even though Victorian's maybe worse news. Maybe Moqorro is worse news himself. Victorian is just some guy that isn't going to affect the global scale of things, whereas Moqorro could influence Dany, which is a much bigger deal, potentially. So, but on the other hand, Moqorro, everything he's done, as we've seen, in terms of predicting, has been accurate. So if she was a threat to him, he would probably perceive that. So I guess that she's not, which to me implies that she's not something other than she seems in terms of like some sort of assassin or spy, something like that. She might, I think more along the lines of what you said, that she's part of Euron's psychological games, like a Kyra sort of thing to Theon, like the way Ramsay played with him. Which brings me to another parallel, Wex being, the one whose tongue was ripped out. and is Theon's former squire and is helping Davos navigate to Rickon. So maybe if the Dusky Woman somehow survives all this, you wonder if there's things that she could tell. I don't know. That'd be interesting.
To tell Euron when they get back, I suppose so.
Or
And
no, to
the
even
other
tell
idea-
Dany if she survived. Like if
that's
Victor,
true.
like if they all end up in Dany's
Yes, no,
court,
hold up one finger.
and who knows?
That's that's one of those things that Victorian, I think, doesn't realize that you can still get information out of the mute person, basically.
Yeah.
Even though she has her tongue tied out, like, and that's also a theme with Jaime.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a kind of weird parallel. Jaime and what's his name? The
Ilyn
headman?
Payne. Yeah.
Ilyn Payne. He's telling all of his secrets to Ilyn Payne under the assumption he can't tell anybody. It's like, why do these characters think that? Don't you realize that somebody can ask you yes or no questions and you can just
Yep.
nod? Or
It's great,
It's
yeah,
like-
because those are happening at the same time in A Dance with Dragons or in a Feast for Crows. That like even though they're split books, but they're basically right at the same time. So yeah, we took note of that at the time, and you got to consider the Dusky Woman in this mix of these like close companions of people who are POVs, but they themselves can't speak. It's really interesting.
I also wonder, in terms of like the hissing at Moqorro. So we don't know anything about her backstory, but we do know that Red Priests are well known for sacrificing people, and especially
Ooh.
sacrificing people they don't care about. Like he gets Victarion to sacrifice Maester Kerwin. Melisandre is on a burning spree in Westeros, so maybe she has an experience with the Red Priests wherever Euron found her. But also Moqorro's scary as hell. He's like
extremely scary.
He's huge. He's got the crazy wild hair. He has those tattoos that move and like grow. He's got that big staff with the dragon face on it. Like, I don't think you have to have a magical reason to look at Moqorro and go like, this guy is bad news.
Yeah, that's right. And it's the same with like the horn, right? Like the horn has like he's putting his hand over the glyphs and it seems to sing to him, and it's like that's not normal, man. It's like, is that his memory thinking about the power from this when he heard it blown, or is that real? Is that some actual magic happening? Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. George is so good at melding the supernatural with human conflict in ways that you can't really tell what's what, and you get a sense that it's both. A lot of times, I think that's usually where I land, is it's both.
That's true. She could also be like the straight man in the relationship, where Victorian has his mind so warped at this point, she's the only one having correct reactions to things.
That's cool. I like that. One suggestion that she's from Noth. It's possible because she's so she's so like, what's the word, doesn't fight back, which is the Nothy or
Pacifist.
Like, yeah, but she doesn't have like the golden eyes, but so I'm not sure about that, but I wonder if her nationality is relevant at all. It probably isn't, but
if she's found her way in a slave trade, she's probably encountered the Red Priests and knows enough to be scared of them.
That's a great, yeah, you're totally right, because they are slavers. Like like the Melisandre was given to the Red Temple as a slave, and most likely Moqorro was too, given the face tats. So yeah, that's a good point. Okay, well, I think we're pretty much done. I have one big question for you, which is one last big question, and I guess we have a couple remaining questions from the audience here, but one big question for you is, given everything we've discussed, what do you think is going to be the Victarion's death? How do you think he dies? Any predictions related to that? If you want to throw out a when and where as well, I'm all ears. I'm curious what you think, because I think it's myself. I think it's going to be after the battle, some point after the battle. But I also think he's got to have a duel or two. You know, there's certain things that have been set up, like the firearm has to happen first. But anyway, what do you think?
So my preference is my Crusader Kings 2 game when Victarion mounted a dragon and captured Stannis from King's Landing. That was my favorite.
Whoa!
I'm hoping that was an amazing game where
cool.
I took him as my chief general, and he took a dragon and started like just kicking ass for me. I was like, thank you, Victarion, you did great things. But I guess in terms of like the non-awesome Crusader Kings game I played, I don't think he dies in the Battle of Fire. I don't think, like, there's too much about him and Euron at this point for them not to clash again at some point. That there's such an idea that he's trying to conquer Euron, that he's trying to one-up him. He's going to use Dragonbinder to conquer the world. He's going to take the Seastone chair back from him. He's going to use all these gifts. He's going to become like the greatest guy out there. That it would be kind of an underwhelm if he just dies in battle.
Yeah.
Like, why would you set up all this psychological warfare that his brother is using on him just to have him essentially die with a spear through his back? I mean, like, that'd be realistic, but I don't think it would be like particularly good narratively.
And if Euron dies, which is a lot more telegraphed at this point, given where he is at, then you've only got one POV left that really has a lot of memory and understanding of Euron, and that might be valuable given what a big character he's set to be. So yeah, I hadn't considered that either. That's a good point.
But in terms of like where he's going to go, what's going to happen in the Winds of Winter, I can't imagine a scenario in which Daenerys Targaryen looks at Victorian Greyjoy and says, "You know what? I'm in. I'm in with you. Firehand, Dragonhorn, Greyjoy, pirates. This is what I need to take Westeros. You're it, Victorian Greyjoy." I think Moqorro makes the much stronger case. I think I don't think he ends up with Dany. I don't think he ends up in her court. But I think we may see him with everything taken from him and him sort of becoming like one ship on his way back to Westeros, that kind of thing. Just like a totally broken man trying to get revenge on Euron after, because George has set up, he has insanely high expectations of where he's going after this battle.
Yeah.
So the only place for that to go is rock bottom.
Well, he'll have to rename the Iron Victory the Iron Defeat, I suppose.
Well, he's famous for his defeat. That's his thing. He lost to Stannis, so
that's true.
It's kind of telegraphed that he's not gonna win the way he wants.
Hey, we talked about parallels between Stannis and Dany. Maybe that'll be another one.
There you go.
Both of them beat Victarion.
I mean, she may see him as a adversary, and that's probably not incorrect.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Two last comments from commenters. Stefan B says that's definitely an inversion of Victarion not learning the names of these characters to compare to Dany, who really tried hard to remember Hossea's name, though she did forget Hossea's name. Although, to be fair, she forgot Hossea's name when she's like hungry and vomiting and exposed, like out on the Dothraki Sea by herself. So maybe that's part of just hunger and thirst and being tired, but it still pissed her off. That made her sad and shamed that she couldn't think of the name, whereas Victarion here is not even trying and probably lying to them about his intent to learn their names if they survive. Although I guess that wouldn't be such a hard thing to do if they did survive, but it's really, no one really expects that.
Maybe there's something in that. The idea that, like, I believe he's promised by Moqorro that everyone will know the Iron Captain's name. Maybe he becomes anonymous.
Oh, wow. That's a great idea.
The one thing he fears.
Everyone's going to forget his name. Yes. I like it. I liked it. One other final comment. Francis Drake, the great English pirate. He was pretty much a pirate.
Yeah.
he's not always remembered that
they
way.
were all
but
basically pirates.
He was a pirate. Yeah. He officially a privateer, but pirate. Yeah. He had a similar maneuver. One time he was trapped. I think he was, rather than trying to get in, he was trying to get out. I forget exactly, but he used fire ships where he took ordinary looking, innocent, mundane ships, made them look normal, or just kept them looking normal. They were already looking normal, filled them with explosives and sailed them towards, I think, a harbor or a blockade. And then the blockade had to get out of the way, or else these, and they didn't know it was coming until the last minute because the ships looked just like ordinary ships. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait, these are on fire. So they had to get out of the way. It's kind of a bit of a similar idea in that you use innocent looking ships as a decoy for something far more sinister or aggressive. That's pretty cool. Like referring to, and of course we referred to this sort of thing as a standard pirate trick. And well, Francis Drake wasn't nearly the first person to use fire ships in the world. It's just a particularly notable anecdote that comes to mind. At least it came to Stefan B's mind, and I had heard of that example thanks to our friends over at the Pirate History podcast, which I'm a big fan of and occasionally shout out. It's been a while though, so hey, shout out to the Pirate History podcast. Great show. Well,
also in the Blackwater, they use a fire ship basically.
yeah, you're right. Yeah, very similar, except yeah, I guess in this case they weren't so cautious at the Blackwater, but you're right, it's the same concept. They're just like Sir Imry's like, nah, let's just go. Who cares? They've only got 5 ships. I don't care.
Ships with nobody on board? What's the problem? Easy to conquer.
That's even easier. Wow. Okay, well, thanks so much, JoeMagician. You're great. You're always so smooth with your words off the drop of a hat, and you always have such great things to say, things that I've never considered, which I imagine is also true for our listeners. I bet a lot of people out there today, and people who haven't heard it yet, will be feeling the same way when they do. That, hey, those were some really good takes by JoeMagician. New things to think about.
Especially because this is the first time I've read this chapter. You asked me to read it, and I was like, I have never read this one before. All right, we'll give it a shot.
Fresh eyes, right? I mean, that helps.
Talk about the end of it with the summary.
With the summary?
With the fan summary. Did you guys actually talk about that?
We did, yeah. We talked about some of it. There wasn't very much to the fan summary. Like, obviously, we didn't specifically talk about him finger banging the Dusky Woman.
I didn't think I heard that word.
No, we didn't talk about that. I don't suppose there's much to it, but do you have any thoughts on that? Is that symbolic? Like, is that like some Nissa stuff going on there, or is that just? I
believe our thoughts on it were, well, my thought on it was how he linked the Dusky Woman having sex with her with blowing the dragon horn, that they're both sexual in nature in him.
Oh,
that he was like, I'm edging
yeah.
myself before the battle. I can't ejaculate. I can't blow this horn. They're the same thing. I'm like, oh, that's creepy, Victarion. But also, I believe we wondered on Twitter if which hand he used for the finger blasting.
Oh, God, yeah, was it his burned hand or not?
Oh, no. I hope it's not that one.
Yeah, we were like, we hope it's his other hand.
I hope it's the other one, but I do think it's very strange the way that he rubs it and just goes like, my horn. Oh,
I know. I want the
dragons.
exact
Like,
wording of
that's
that.
so creepy.
It's so weird and creepy. Yeah, I want to see the exact precise wording of that. Oh, I kind of don't actually, but I do. We need to properly understand. Although I don't know that we will understand. But to have any chance at understanding it, we need the exact writing of that one.
I wonder if there's like some sort of salt wife thing in her, and if somewhere in here there's like an ironborn thing that he officially took her to wife or something like that.
I don't know. Well,
I don't know enough about their culture.
I'd be salty about it. Ayo.
Whoa! With the fire fist. Nobody likes the fire
Salt and
fisting.
fire. It's not blood and fire now. It's salt and fire.
Oh my God.
Fire fist. So that's about a wrap. What do you have coming up, JoeMagician? Tell everybody again where to find you, what you've done recently, and what's coming up. All that goodness.
You can find me on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/JoeMagician. I also upload everything as a podcast feed to the wit and wisdom of JoeMagician, because I am so clever that I copied everybody else that has ever used that name. They're basically just audio rips of all my streams and my videos. So if you don't have 2 hours to watch me like staring into the camera and looking around and doing all these kinds, you can just listen to it that way. Upcoming, I have my video about Lady Stoneheart in the Winds of Winter, what she's really up to beyond just killing Freys. I think there's a very, very particular goal that I think is being overlooked by characters in the universe and kind of in the fandom in general. After that, I have a super secret project of I got something nobody else has, and I'm gonna make a video about it. That's gonna be kind of something to look forward to.
That's cool. Well, I have no
idea.
Like, y'all out there listening, Joe hasn't like told us what it is, so we're in as much in the dark as you are about what the secret is. So something for us all to look forward to. Very cool.
It's gonna be amazing. I'm sure everyone will enjoy it.
Nice.
And then on every Saturday, except for this coming Saturday, bad timing. This coming Saturday I'll be working, but almost every other Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or Eastern Daylight Time, I think it is now. I go live to talk for 2 hours about kind of whatever comes up to my head. My recent topics were Marwyn the Mage, Maester Aemon. I've done one entirely just on glass candles.
Nice. Yeah, you tend to like you like a lot of the supernatural topics. I think you're really that's one of your strengths. I mean, you have many strengths, but that's one I think talking about like where your interest tends to. That's kind of how when I think about you. Your name is JoeMagician, as Shea says.
JoeMagician, it's in the name. Yeah, I tend to like the fantasy stuff and trying to dig into it and really what it is.
Part of why I thought you'd be a great fit for this one, because it's full of fantasy elements, right?
It's a
Certainly
lot
more
of them,
than
and how they meld with the psychology, because George doesn't just use them for fantasy woo, I guess I would say. He
right.
only uses them in a way that enhances the stories he's already telling.
Yeah, which is why there's not a ton of it, although it is certainly increased over time as the story has gotten deeper. But they continue to be, you're right, they're all serving the character elements. They're
Yes.
it's not the other way around. They're big.
There are stories where the fantasy or the sci-fi elements are the plot. That's not
Yeah.
a Song of Ice and Fire.
Yep, and that is what sets it apart from so many other things. It's not the only one that does that, but it's one of the best. It's certainly one of the most popular, and that is a big part of why we're here. So thank you to George R. R. Martin as well for creating all this. Every once in a while, we got to give the big man a shout out. He deserves it.
Love George R. R. Martin.
Yep, the man, the myth, the legend. That's what the M stands for. No, it's only one M.
And you
RR.
up in his castle in the mountains of somewhere, up in his cabin. He's actually become Leighton Hightower at this point. He is Leighton Hightower.
So next time, as I said at the beginning, we're sticking with all the Slaver's Bay chapters. So we're going to do Tyrion 1 and 2. We barely have anything on Tyrion 1. Tyrion 2 is the one that's fully released. And our guest will be Gray Area. So we'll be doing that. And then we'll be following that up with Barristan 1 and 2 the weeks after that. So we shall be announcing the full guest list with those as we get that set, as well as the rest of the schedule, which is almost done. But with guests, it takes a little longer to line things up to make sure everyone can make these times and getting it all in order. It's not quite the same as us just making our own schedule with only us to consider. So please be patient with us as we get that schedule made. It should be out this week. We did mention a couple of our older episodes during this one. We mentioned the Battle of Fire episode, which was also a long time ago, but most of what's there is still accurate. There hasn't been a lot of changes, maybe a few different interpretations, but we try to set up all the structure and just get everything straight so you understand what's happening, who all the players are, and all that. So that's a big point of that. Same goes for our Hellhorn episode, which the Forsaken chapter hadn't been released. The World of Ice and Fire hadn't been released. Fire and Blood hadn't come out. The show was in season 2 when we released our Hellhorn episode. But of course, since the show didn't have the horn, not a whole lot has changed. So there's not a whole lot of overlap with what we discussed today. We get deeper into the origin of the horn, Valyrian stuff more generally, more about Moqorro, things like that. So very relevant despite how old it is, and it expands on like a lot of stuff we talked about today. If you are interested in participating in the Voice Project, meaning our Winds of Winter chapter audio projects, which will just going to be free for everyone. We're not only not interested in making money off of that, we're not allowed to. This is someone else's material. We can't just do that. It's like trying to make money off of cover songs, basically. So no, this is something fun we're doing. A lot of community people are adding their effort and time and skills. A lot of skillful people have joined in this project. If you want to be a voice actor, that means potentially taking on the role of a big character, a main character with lots of lines, or just getting in there with a one-liner. There's a lot of characters, over 100 in these 10 chapters that have been pre-released. Over 100 voices, different characters speak. And like I said, some of them have one line. Like, for example, we need to cast the ravens that speak during Theon's chapter. There's 2 ravens. They say different things. Actually, we've already casted one of those. But we still have 1 raven slot, and about 90 other voices or so haven't been cast yet. So definitely submit for any role and any of the TWOW chapters. We may not get back to you right away because we're working on them kind of one at a time. But feel free to submit them at any time to westeroshistory@gmail.com. Join our Discord as well, where there's discussions about it happening. A lot of that stuff is centered there. So if that piques your interest, get on in, get involved, or just hang out and wait for the final product and listen to it and enjoy it when that drops. Thanks again to our guest, JoeMagician. Thanks to Ashea for managing so many things off screen and production and all those things. So much goes on behind the scenes here. History of Westeros mods, got to give them a shout out. They really deserve it. Scott and Rebecca and Ari and Tommy and Jennifer and Laura, and I think I named everyone. Apologies if not. And you guys do a great job over there on Facebook. We had our first ever Facebook live chat. I got on Friday instead of the game stream and just answered questions for a little while. You can see the thread on our Facebook group with timestamps for all the questions asked. We'll do one of those every once in a while. It was fun enough that we'll make it semi-regular. You can also interact with myself and other History of Westeros commenters on Flick and Slack. Like I said, Facebook and Discord as well already. Thanks to Michael Klarfeld, a.k.a. Claridox, for our video intro and for the maps behind me. Thanks to Kevin McLeod for the Valar Rereadis intro music. Thanks to Joey Townsend and Jesse Koval for the regular History of Westeros music. Thanks to our Bengineer for making our sound quality as good as it could be. Thank you to our many patrons for the financial support. We would not be here today without you. We wouldn't have been here last week without you. We wouldn't have been here any of these weeks without you. So you guys are the lifeblood of the show. Guys and gals, we wouldn't be able to do it without you. And our good friends over at the Here Be Dragons show are covering the classic movie Highlander. There can be only one. So that's a cool one. Now check that out. Check them out if you're a fan of that movie or a fan of Here Be Dragons. And that's it, everybody. We'll see you all next week with Gray Area for Tyrion and onward for the rest of the Winds of Winter chapters. Until next time, folks, thanks again, and Valar Rereadis.